Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd share a story like this online. Most people who write these things on Reddit or YouTube comments are either exaggerating or just craving attention. At least, that's what I used to think. But after what happened to me in Florida a few summers ago, I can't keep this bottled up anymore. I need to put it somewhere. Maybe to convince myself I'm not crazy. Maybe to warn others who might end up in the same place. Even now, years later, the memories keep me awake at night, looping in my mind like an old VHS tape that never stops rewinding and replaying. It started when I was driving alone down Highway 27, cutting straight through the swampy parts of Central Florida. I had been on the road for almost 12 hours, trying to get from Tallahassee to Miami in one day. I was running on cheap gas station coffee and adrenaline. By the time the sun dipped behind the trees and the air got that heavy, humid feel that makes your shirt stick to your back, I knew I couldn't keep going. My eyes burned, my hands felt weak on the wheel, and every mile marker blurred into the next. I needed a place to crash. That's when I saw it. Through the trees, half hidden by vines and tall grass, a neon sign flickered. Lakeview Motel, vacancy. It looked like something out of a 1970s postcard, the kind of roadside stop that should have been torn down decades ago. But exhaustion makes you ignore your instincts. I pulled in. The parking lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the concrete. A few old cars sat scattered around, covered in dust, like they hadn't moved in months. The office light glowed yellow behind grimy glass. Inside, the air smelled like old carpet and mildew. Behind the counter stood a man who looked like he had been rooted there for decades. He wore a white button-up shirt, yellowed at the collar, and his smile was too wide, too forced, as if he had practiced it in the mirror until it stuck that way. "You're lucky," he said, sliding a metal key across the counter. "Only one room left tonight. Room 6. Best view of the lake." I glanced toward the window behind him. Beyond the dark line of trees, I could just barely see a patch of black water reflecting the moonlight. For some reason, that lake gave me a chill. Still, I didn't argue. I just wanted a bed. Room 6 was at the far end of the row. The door creaked when I unlocked it. Inside, the smell hit me first. Stale cigarettes mixed with something sour, like wet towels left too long. The carpet was stained, the wallpaper peeling in strips. The bedspread was patterned with faded flowers, and for a second, I thought I saw it move, like something crawling beneath it. But when I yanked it back, it was just shadows. I should have left then. Any sane person would have. But the weight in my body was stronger than the dread in my chest. I lay down, fully clothed, and closed my eyes. That's when the noises began. At first it was subtle, a soft drip 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 as though water was leaking from the ceiling. Then I heard footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I frowned. The motel had only one level. There couldn't be anyone upstairs. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the footsteps grew louder, circling, stopping right above where I lay. Then came the whisper. It was faint at first, like wind slipping through cracks in the wall, but soon it grew clearer, right next to my ear, though no one was there. "Don't look at the lake." I shot up, heart pounding. The room was empty, the door still locked. I told myself I was dreaming, half asleep, caught in that in-between state. But when I lay back down, the whisper came again, stronger this time, urgent. "Don't look at the lake." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the window, staring at the cracked blinds, waiting for morning. At some point, I heard splashing outside as if something large was moving in the water. I tried not to look. I remembered the voice. But my curiosity gnawed at me until, just before dawn, I peeked through the blinds. What I saw made my blood run cold. Out by the lake, figures stood in the fog. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were pale, almost glowing in the gray morning light. Some were children, some adults, all standing perfectly still, facing the water. None of them moved, not even when the wind blew. And then, as if they knew I was watching, they all turned their heads toward me at once. I stumbled back, knocking the chair over. When I looked again, the figures were gone. At sunrise, I went straight to the office, key in hand, ready to demand answers. The clerk was there, same frozen smile, as though he hadn't moved all night. "How was your stay?" he asked. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Who are the people by the lake?" For the first time, his smile faltered. His eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. He lowered his voice. "You weren't supposed to see them." I didn't wait for more. I tossed the key on the counter and walked out fast, almost running to my car. As I pulled onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The motel was gone. I swear to God, where it had stood just hours before, there was nothing but swamp and trees. No building, no sign, not even a patch of cleared ground. Just endless Florida wilderness. For months after, I told myself I had dreamed it, that exhaustion and highway hypnosis had tricked me. But then, about 6 months later, a friend sent me an article from a local Florida paper. It was about a motel fire on Highway 27 in the early 1980s. The Lakeview Motel had burned to the ground, killing everyone inside, guests and staff. Witnesses claimed the fire started near the lake, though no cause was ever found. Locals said the spirits of the dead still lingered, trapped between the water and the ruins. The article included a photo of the victims. My stomach turned to ice when I saw the clerk's face among them, his smile just as wide as the night I checked in. And at the bottom of the article, a final detail chilled me more than anything else. One of the last things survivors had reported before the fire consumed the building was a strange voice whispering through the halls. "Don't look at the lake." I've lived in Florida all my life, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the swamp doesn't forgive curiosity. The Everglades are more than just a stretch of wetlands. They're a maze of secrets, half buried in mud and tangled in mangroves. People think it's just gators and mosquitoes out there, but old Floridians know better. There are places you don't go, even in daylight. Places where the air feels heavier, where even the animals fall silent. My story begins in the summer of 2016, when I was fresh out of college and desperate for adventure. I'd always been drawn to urban exploration, sneaking into abandoned malls, shuttered motels, half-built condos that the 2008 crash had left to rot. So when a buddy of mine, let's call him Eric, told me he had found an old house deep in the Everglades, a place with no record online, no property listing, nothing, I was hooked. "It's like it doesn't exist," Eric said, showing me blurry photos on his phone. The house was 2 stories tall, old wood siding painted white but rotting to gray. The windows were black holes, no glass, no curtains. The strangest thing was its location, smack in the middle of dense swamp, no driveway, no trail, nothing but water and mud. "How'd you even get there?" I asked. "Boat," he grinned. "Come with me this weekend, you'll see." I should have said no. I should have remembered all the warnings my grandfather used to give me about the Everglades, that the swamp hides things better left alone. But back then, I was reckless, hungry for stories, for photos, for anything that made me feel alive. We set out on Saturday morning in Eric's old aluminum John boat. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that makes your clothes cling to you within minutes. We pushed through narrow waterways, past sawgrass taller than our heads. Dragonflies skimmed the water's surface, and somewhere in the distance an alligator bellowed. After almost an hour of winding turns, the swamp opened into a clearing, and there it was. The house stood on a small patch of dry land, its foundation sinking into the muck. Cypress knees jutted up around it like crooked teeth. The roof sagged, shingles missing. Spanish moss draped over the porch like a funeral veil. It looked ancient, older than any house had a right to be in a place like this. Eric tied up the boat, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Come on, man, let's see what's inside." The front door hung half open, creaking when we pushed it. Inside, The air was stale and damp, heavy with the smell of mold. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light cutting through the broken windows. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture covered in white sheets that had yellowed with age. "Feels like they just left," Eric said, pulling a sheet off a couch. A cloud of dust rose, making us cough. We split up, exploring room by room. I wandered into the kitchen. Rusted pots still hung on the wall. A cracked plate sat on the counter, as if someone had set it down mid-meal and never returned. When I opened a cabinet, I found canned food, labels faded but intact. I don't know why, but something about that unsettled me more than the empty rooms. Upstairs, I found a hallway lined with doors. Most were bedrooms, each one stranger than the last. One room was filled with dolls, dozens of them, sitting on shelves, their glass eyes staring blankly. Another room had its walls covered in children's drawings, stick figures with wide black circles for eyes. The last room at the end of the hall had a door that was locked. Eric joined me, and together we forced it open. Inside was a study, or maybe an office. The floor was littered with papers, so many that we couldn't even see the wood beneath. In the center stood a desk with a single object on it, a mirror. Not a big one, just a handheld vanity mirror with an ornate brass frame. The glass was flawless, not a speck of dust, not a single crack, as if it had been placed there yesterday. When I picked it up, something strange happened. For a second, my reflection wasn't mine. It was me, but not me. My face was thinner, my eyes darker, hollow. My mouth hung open in a silent scream. I dropped the mirror, and it clattered to the floor unbroken. "Dude, what the hell?" Eric said, picking it up. He looked into it and frowned. "Looks normal to me." I wanted to leave right then, but Eric was thrilled. He started gathering papers, snapping photos, acting like he had discovered a gold mine. I lingered by the door, uneasy, the hairs on my neck standing up. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps upstairs, above us. But we were upstairs. I froze. Eric heard it too. His grin faded. Slowly we turned toward the hall. The sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped just outside the study door. And then the door slammed shut. We were plunged into darkness. Eric cursed, fumbling with his phone flashlight. When the beam clicked on, the papers on the floor were gone. The desk was gone. The mirror was gone. The room was empty. That's when I noticed something worse. The door wasn't just shut. It was gone. Where it had been, there was now solid wall. We pounded, screamed, clawed at the wood, but nothing budged. My chest tightened, panic rising. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Shadows shifted across the walls, moving even when Eric's flashlight was still. And then, in the corner, something began to take shape. It was a figure, tall and thin, its body made of darkness itself. Its head tilted unnaturally, like a bird studying prey. I could feel its eyes on me, though there was nothing in its face but emptiness. It raised one long finger and pointed at me. The next thing I knew, I was waking up on the porch, gasping for air. The sun was setting, the swamp buzzing with cicadas. Eric sat beside me, pale and trembling. Neither of us remembered how we got out of that room. Neither of us spoke the entire boat ride back. That night I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw that mirror, my reflection screaming silently. 2 days later, Eric stopped answering my calls. When I went to his apartment, the door was unlocked, the place ransacked. His phone sat on the table, flashlight still on, battery dead. He was never seen again. I told the police everything, but they didn't believe me. They searched the swamp, but they said there was no house there. No clearing, no dry land, nothing but endless water and reeds. For years, I tried to convince myself it was a shared hallucination, until last month. I was driving through a small town on the edge of the Everglades, and I stopped at a thrift store. On a shelf by the register, something caught my eye. It was a brass-framed mirror, handheld, flawless glass. When I picked it up, my reflection wasn't mine. It was Eric. And this time, he wasn't screaming. He was smiling. There's a stretch of road on Florida's Atlantic coast that locals swear is cursed. A1A runs along the ocean, weaving between palm trees, beachfront condos, and sleepy little towns that seem stuck in the 1980s. Tourists love it for the views, but ask anyone who grew up around there and they'll warn you not to drive it alone at night. I didn't believe the stories until one night in 2019 when I was heading home from a late shift in Daytona. The air was thick with salt and humidity, my windows down as the sound of waves echoed faintly from the dark shore. The road was nearly empty, just me and the occasional truck rumbling past. I had an hour's drive ahead of me and I was already exhausted. That's when I saw her. She stood on the shoulder, illuminated by my headlights. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, wearing a white sundress that looked almost glowing in the dark. Her long hair clung damply to her shoulders, and she held her arms crossed tight against the wind. She didn't wave, didn't signal. She just stood there, staring down the road as if waiting for someone. I slowed instinctively, rolling down my window. "You need a ride?" I called. She turned to me then, and for a moment I thought she was smiling, but her face looked pale, washed out, her eyes reflecting the headlights in a way that made them seem almost silver. "Yes," she said softly. "South. Please." I don't know why I didn't question it. Maybe it was the late hour, maybe the way her voice carried in the night air. I unlocked the passenger door, and she slid in without another word. The scent of seawater followed her, sharp and briny, like she'd just stepped out of the ocean. We drove in silence for a while. She stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass, though every time I glanced, her features looked different. Sharper, older, then younger again, like shifting through faces. I told myself it was just the play of the passing streetlights. After about 10 minutes, I tried to break the silence. "So, where exactly are you headed?" She didn't answer right away. Then, still staring at the water, she whispered, "Home." Something in her tone made the hairs on my arms rise. It wasn't the word itself, but the way she said it, like home wasn't a place, but something deeper, something final. Another few minutes passed before she finally spoke again, more clearly this time. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I laughed nervously. "Not really. Why? You gonna tell me this road is haunted?" She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes caught the dashboard light and I saw they weren't silver at all. They were black. Completely, utterly black. "Yes," she said. "This road belongs to us." I slammed the brakes without thinking, the car skidding slightly on the asphalt. My heart thundered in my chest. But when I looked at the passenger seat, it was empty. The smell of seawater lingered. The fabric of the seat was wet. I sat there for what felt like forever, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Finally, I pulled back onto the road, driving faster now, desperate to get home. But less than a mile later, my headlights caught movement again. She was standing on the shoulder. Same dress, same damp hair, same pale face. My blood went cold. I didn't stop this time. I pressed the gas harder, flying past her. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. That should have been the end of it. I should have gone home, locked my doors, and never spoken of it again. But curiosity is a poison. A few days later, I started asking around, co-workers, friends, even strangers in bars. Most people laughed it off, but one older guy at a bait shop leaned in close when I mentioned it. "You saw her," he whispered. "The girl from Ormond Beach. She's been out there for decades." According to him, in the early 1970s, a young woman drowned after her car skidded off A1A and into the ocean during a storm. Locals said her spirit still lingered, hitchhiking southbound, trying to find her way home. Anyone foolish enough to stop and pick her up would vanish within a year, dragged into the water the way she was. I laughed it off at first, but then I remembered the wet seat, the smell of seawater that clung to my clothes long after I showered, and then the dreams began. Every night, I'd dream of driving that road, the same endless stretch of highway, the moon over the water, the crash of waves in the dark, and every night she was there, sometimes in the passenger seat, sometimes in the middle of the road, sometimes standing just outside my window, her black eyes staring in. Last week, the dreams got worse. I woke up coughing, my lungs burning, my sheets soaked through. The smell of salt water filled my room. My shoes by the door were wet as though I'd walked straight into the ocean. And 2 nights ago, I woke to find footprints on my floor, bare, damp, leading from the bedroom door to the side of my bed. I don't know how much longer I have. The old man at the bait shop told me her victims never make it a full year. It's been 11 months since I picked her up. Every night now I hear waves crashing outside my window, though I live miles from the beach. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear her voice, soft and close to my ear. South, please. When I was a kid growing up in Central Florida, my grandfather used to warn me about the land our town was built on. Not the usual old man stories about gators or sinkholes, but something darker. He'd sit on the porch at dusk, sipping his sweet tea and say, "Never trust an orange grove that's too quiet at night. Means it's growing on the wrong kind of bones." I thought he was just telling tall tales. Florida has always had ghost stories tied to its swamps and groves, whispers about Seminole burial grounds or settlers who vanished into the wetlands. But when I was older, when I finally saw what lay under one particular grove just outside of Claremont, I realized he hadn't been joking. He had been warning me. The story starts in 2014, when my friend Jonah bought a piece of cheap land off Highway 50. It was 10 acres of overgrown orange trees, tangled with vines and thick brush. He dreamed of clearing it, planting new trees and starting a small citrus business. Everyone told him he'd wasted his money. Florida's orange industry was dying from disease and imports. But Jonah didn't care. He was stubborn, the kind of guy who believed hard work could force the world into shape. He asked me to help him clear the place. I needed the cash, so I agreed. At first, it was just grueling labor. Chainsaws, machetes, sweat running down our backs under the brutal Florida sun. But after a few days, we started noticing things. The grove was too quiet. No birds in the trees, no insects buzzing, no distant calls of frogs from the swamp. Just silence, heavy and wrong. And then there were the holes. Dozens of shallow depressions scattered across the grove like old graves. Some were no more than dips in the soil, others so deep our boots sank when we stepped too close. Jonah joked about it at first, calling it the Grove of 1,000 Graves. But the longer we worked, the less he laughed. One afternoon, while pulling up a tangle of roots, Jonah's shovel hit something solid. At first, we thought it was just limestone, but when we cleared the dirt away, we saw the edge of a wooden plank. Rotten, soft to the touch. Jonah dug more, and soon we uncovered what looked like the corner of a coffin. He froze. I froze. Neither of us said the word out loud, but we both knew. We should have stopped right then, called the sheriff something. But Jonah's pride got in the way. "Probably just an old settler," he muttered, shoving the dirt back in. People buried folks anywhere back then. He refused to admit his precious land might be worthless, cursed, unsellable. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that broken coffin in the dirt, wondering how many more were beneath the trees. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Jonah. "You hear that?" he whispered. His voice was trembling. I listened. At first nothing. Then faintly through the static I heard it. Knocking. Slow, rhythmic, hollow. "Coming from the grove," Jonah said. "Been going on for an hour." I told him to get out, to go back inside, but before I could say more, the line went dead. The next morning I drove out to his place. His truck was in the driveway, but the house was empty. I found him outside, standing at the edge of the grove, staring at the trees. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. "They're under there," he said hoarsely. "All of them. I heard them all night." I tried to reason with him, told him he needed sleep, that it was just animals or his imagination, but he wouldn't listen. He grabbed a shovel and marched back into the grove. Reluctantly, I followed. We dug where the knocking seemed loudest, the ground unusually soft. Within minutes, we uncovered another coffin, older than the first, wood splintering at the touch. Jonah pried it open with the shovel and the stench hit us like a wall. Inside was a skeleton, its bones tangled with roots that seemed to grow straight through the ribcage, anchoring it to the earth. But worse than that were the claw marks. The inside of the coffin lid was shredded, gouged by desperate fingernails. Jonah staggered back, gagging. "They weren't dead," he whispered. "They were buried alive." Before I could respond, the ground beneath us shifted. It was subtle at first, like the earth breathing. Then it gave way. I fell hard, dirt collapsing around me, tumbling into darkness. When I landed, the impact knocked the breath out of my chest. My flashlight skittered across the ground, flickering. I was in a cavern. Or maybe not a cavern, a crypt. Rows of coffins stretched into the shadows, stacked haphazardly, some open, some broken, bones spilling out. The walls were damp, roots dangling like ropes. The air was thick, suffocating, filled with the faint sound of scratching. And then I realized it wasn't faint. It was everywhere. From every coffin, every shadowed corner, came the sound of fingernails clawing wood. Dozens, hundreds of frantic scratches all around me. I screamed for Jonah, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. My flashlight flickered, and in that moment of dim light, I saw them. Figures crawling out of the coffins. Not skeletons, not corpses, something in between. Their skin was gray, stretched tight over bone, their eyes milky and blind, their mouths opening in silent screams. Hands reached for me, cold and damp, pulling at my legs. I scrambled, clawing at the dirt walls, desperate to climb out. Just as one hand closed around my ankle, yanking me down, Jonah's shovel appeared above, his arm reaching. I don't remember how he pulled me out. I just remember running, both of us stumbling through the grove, not stopping until we reached the house. We left that night, drove until sunrise, neither of us speaking. Jonah never went back to his land. He sold it cheap a year later, claiming crop disease had ruined it. But here's the part I can't shake. Last month, out of morbid curiosity, I looked up old records at the county office. I found a single mention of that property, an old pauper's cemetery from the 1800s, unmarked, forgotten when the grove was planted. Hundreds of bodies dumped there, many of them yellow fever victims. But the records had a chilling note in the margins, written in faded ink. Buried alive, suspected, premature. And now, some nights I wake to a sound outside my window, soft, rhythmic, knocking. I grew up in Florida, not far from Orlando, where tourists flood in for Mickey Mouse and roller coasters. But beyond the polished streets and flashing lights, there are places no guidebook will ever show you. One of those places is an abandoned theme park that few locals even talk about. It was supposed to rival Disney in the late 80s, but it went bankrupt before it could open to the public. The land was fenced off, swallowed slowly by the swamp and the creeping vines. My friends and I heard rumors about it for years. Kids disappearing, workers dying in accidents, rides that somehow ran on their own at night. Of course, when we were teenagers, those rumors sounded more like an invitation than a warning. One summer night when I was 17, me and 3 friends, Evan, Marcus, and Kayla, decided to sneak in. It wasn't hard. The chain-link fence was rusted, parts of it bent low enough to crawl under. The air inside felt different, heavier, like stepping into a world forgotten by time. Vines strangled old ticket booths, shattered glass crunched under our sneakers, and the faint smell of mold and stagnant water clung to everything. We carried flashlights, but even their beams seemed swallowed by the darkness. The first thing we found was the carousel. Its painted horses were cracked and peeling, their glass eyes missing, their wooden mouths frozen in eternal screams. The whole structure leaned slightly to one side, but when Marcus brushed against it, the thing groaned and shifted, spinning a few inches on its own as though it remembered the rhythm of a song long gone. We laughed nervously, pretending it was nothing, but none of us touched it again. We wandered deeper into the park, past food stalls where rusted fryers sat like tombs and soda machines stood empty, their fronts smashed open. The deeper we went, the louder the cicadas seemed to get, until it felt like a chorus drowning out our thoughts. That's when Evan froze, pointing toward the roller coaster track looming ahead. We could see the silhouette of the cars at the very top, like they had been left mid-climb decades ago. But as we watched, the cars shifted. Not much, just a twitch forward, like something invisible had nudged them. Marcus swore and said it was probably the wind. But Kayla grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. At first I thought she meant the cicadas, but then I heard it too. Laughter. Faint, like children giggling far away. Except it wasn't far away. It seemed to circle us, bouncing between the broken rides and empty stalls. We spun our flashlights around, but the beams caught only shadows that seemed to move a second too late, like they weren't shadows at all. We should have left then, but teenage curiosity can be stronger than fear. So we pressed on, finally reaching what looked like the park's main attraction, a massive fun house shaped like a grinning clown's head. Its teeth were chipped and yellowed, vines crawling out of its eyes like tears. I hated clowns even then, and every instinct screamed not to go inside. But Marcus, ever the daredevil, pushed the door open and stepped in. The smell hit us instantly, rot, mildew, and something sharp and metallic like old blood. The halls inside were lined with cracked mirrors, most too dirty to reflect much. But as we moved deeper, I noticed something strange. My reflection wasn't following me exactly. When I turned, it turned late. When I blinked, it kept staring. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it until Kayla suddenly screamed. She had shined her light into a mirror, and instead of her reflection, there was a man. He stood behind her, grinning wide, his skin pale and rubbery like a mask, his eyes too dark, like holes burned into his face. We whipped around, but no one was there. Evan grabbed her hand and shouted that we needed to leave, but when we turned back, the hallway behind us had changed. The entrance was gone. The mirrors now stretched endlessly, each one reflecting not us, but different scenes. Children sitting lifeless on carousel horses, workers hanging from roller coaster beams, families trapped on Ferris wheels that spun into the sky. It felt like we had walked into another world, one the park itself had created to trap us. We ran, our footsteps echoing in ways that didn't match the rhythm of our steps. Sometimes, I heard extra footsteps behind us, faster, heavier. At one point, Marcus stopped to catch his breath, but before we could grab him, the floor beneath him gave way. He fell screaming into blackness and we never heard him land. We screamed his name until our throats burned, but the park didn't give him back. When we finally burst out of the funhouse, the night air hit us like a punch. But the park was different now. The rides weren't silent. The carousel spun slowly, its horses moving up and down. The roller coaster creaked as the cars inched higher, higher, then crashed down in a deafening roar that shook the ground. Lights flickered on across the park, but the bulbs glowed a sickly yellow, revealing shapes standing in the distance. Dozens of them. Some looked like children, some like workers in uniforms, some just shadows shaped like people. All of them were watching us. We didn't think. We just ran. Through the food stalls, past the broken ticket booths, until we reached the fence. Evan and Kayla scrambled under first. As I crawled through, I heard something. Marcus's voice, faint but clear, calling my name from deep inside the park. I froze, my heart tearing in two. But when I looked back, I saw him standing by the clown funhouse waving at me. Only, it wasn't Marcus. His body was too thin, His smile stretched too wide, his eyes hollow. Kayla yanked me through the fence, screaming at me not to look back. We ran until we reached the car, until the lights of Orlando swallowed the darkness behind us. None of us spoke for days after that. Evan refused to even talk about it, and Kayla had nightmares so bad she moved out of state the following year. As for me, I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that we imagined the voices, the shadows, Marcus's fall. But then a few weeks later, I drove past the fence again. There, hanging on the chain link like it had been nailed in place, was Marcus's backpack. Torn, dirty, but undeniably his. The police said it was just kids messing around, but I know better. That park doesn't let people go. Not really. And sometimes late at night, when the air is heavy and the cicadas fall silent, I swear I can still hear the faint echo of carnival music drifting through the Florida swamp. When I was a kid, my family rented a house for a summer near the edge of the Everglades. My father thought it would be a cheap way to get out of the city, some peace and quiet by the water. The house itself was old, a 2-story wooden structure that sagged at the corners as though it had been standing too long against the swamp's damp air. The boards creaked with every step, and the walls smelled faintly of mildew no matter how many windows we opened. But the strangest thing about the house was its silence. The Everglades are never quiet. There's always something chirping, buzzing, or croaking. Yet, around that house, it was dead still. No frogs, no crickets, no birds. Just silence and the low hum of the swamp that seemed to breathe all on its own. I was maybe 12 at the time, curious and restless. The swamp fascinated me, though my mother warned me not to wander too far. "People get lost out there," she said, her face unusually serious. "And not everyone comes back." She wasn't just worried about gators or snakes. There was something in her voice that hinted at something deeper, something unspoken. I brushed it off as paranoia, the way kids do, but I couldn't shake the way her eyes lingered on the swamp like she was afraid it might look back at her. The first few nights passed uneventfully. My father sat on the porch drinking beer. My mother read in the living room, and I played with my flashlight under the covers. But then, on the 4th night, I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was my father moving around downstairs, but when I listened closer, I realized it was a tapping, steady, deliberate against my bedroom window. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, pulling the sheets tighter around me. The window looked out onto the swamp, nothing but darkness beyond the glass. Slowly, I sat up, heart pounding, and turned my flashlight toward it. For a second, I saw nothing, just the reflection of my pale face staring back. But then, as the beam caught the glass, I saw fingers. Long, pale fingers pressed against the window pane, tapping lightly, almost playfully. They weren't my father's hands or anyone's I knew. They were too thin, the nails too sharp, almost claw-like. I gasped, and just like that, the fingers slipped out of sight, leaving only fog on the glass, like breath from the other side. The next morning, I told my parents. My father laughed it off, saying it was probably a tree branch, but there were no trees near that window. My mother didn't laugh. She just went quiet, her lips pressed tight, and I noticed she started locking every door and window in the house after that. But locking the windows didn't stop the tapping. It came back the next night, louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I buried my head under the pillow until sleep finally took me, but by then, I could swear I heard a voice whispering my name through the glass. The following night, it was worse. I woke up not to tapping, but to scratching. Nails dragging slowly across the wood of the house, circling, like something was testing the walls, looking for a way in. On the 6th night, I woke to silence again. Too much silence. Not even the wind moved through the swamp. I lay still, listening, when suddenly the silence broke with the groan of the front door opening downstairs. I sat up, frozen, straining to hear. Footsteps creaked slowly across the wooden floorboards, one by one, heading toward the stairs. I wanted to scream for my parents, but my throat locked up, dry and useless. I just listened as the footsteps climbed, closer and closer, until they reached the hallway outside my room. The doorknob turned. Just slightly. Enough to rattle, but not enough to open. I couldn't breathe. And then, silence again. Whoever, whatever it was, just stood there on the other side of the door. I finally forced my body to move, diving under the covers, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. When morning came, the door was still locked. My parents swore they hadn't heard a thing. The days became unbearable. My father insisted everything was fine, but even he started looking uneasy, drinking more, staring out into the swamp for hours like he expected something to rise from the water. My mother hardly spoke at all, just clutched her rosary and muttered prayers under her breath. And me? I couldn't sleep, waiting every night for the tapping, the scratching, the footsteps. It all came to a breaking point on the 10th night. I woke not to tapping or scratching, but to the sound of the window sliding open. I shot upright in bed, my flashlight shaking in my hand, and pointed it at the window. The glass was gone, completely removed like it had never been there. And inside the frame, crawling into my room, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that bent wrong, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Its skin was the same pale color as the fingers I'd seen before, stretched tight over bones that looked too sharp, too jagged to be human. Its face, or what should have been its face, was nothing but a smooth surface, blank and featureless. Yet somehow, I knew it was looking at me. I screamed, finally, loud enough to wake the whole house. My father burst into the room, wielding a baseball bat, but by the time he got there, the thing was gone. The window was intact, glass perfectly in place, as though it had never been touched. We left the house the very next morning. My father refused to talk about what he saw or didn't see, but he didn't argue with my mother when she demanded we never go back. Years later, when I was older, I looked up the history of that property. Turns out, the house had been built in the 1920s and abandoned for decades before the landlord started renting it again in the 90s. The original owners? A family of 4 who disappeared without a trace. Neighbors claimed they saw them wandering into the swamp one night and never returning. Some said they heard tapping on their windows too, right before the family vanished. I don't know what it was that stalked us in that house, but sometimes, when the night is still and heavy, I hear it again in my head, tap, tap, tap. And deep down I know, whatever lives in the Everglades isn't just watching from the water. Sometimes it comes to the windows. Sometimes it waits at the door. When I first moved to Tallahassee for college, I thought the scariest thing I'd have to deal with was finals week. But I was wrong. The real terror came one night, when a group of friends convinced me to explore an old abandoned asylum just outside the city limits. It wasn't marked on most maps anymore, just a husk of concrete buildings hidden behind overgrown trees and rusted fences. Officially, it had closed down decades ago, after reports of patient mistreatment and mysterious deaths. Unofficially, everyone in town had a story about it. The screams people claimed to hear at night, the shadows seen moving behind its broken windows, the disappearances of curious teens who went in and never came back. The night we went, the air was thick and damp, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. Our group was small, me, my roommate Tyler, and 2 girls from our dorm, Melissa and Janelle. We brought flashlights, a couple of beers, and the cocky bravado of kids who thought ghost stories were just that, stories. The fence was easy to slip through, bent down by years of trespassers, and within minutes we were inside the courtyard. The asylum loomed in front of us like a monument to everything forgotten, tall, gray, and lifeless, with its windows gaping open like black mouths. Inside, the air was cooler, almost too cold, as if the walls themselves were sucking the warmth out of us. Our flashlights cut across peeling paint, graffiti scrawled in angry red letters, and broken furniture scattered across the halls. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. The sound of our footsteps echoed unnaturally, almost as though the building was listening. We found old patient rooms, each one worse than the last. Rusted bed frames bolted to the floor, leather straps dangling from them like forgotten restraints. The stench of mildew and something metallic lingered in the air. In one room, Melissa swore she saw someone sitting in the corner, but when we swung our lights around, it was just a pile of blankets. She laughed it off, but her hands shook when she tried to relight her cigarette. Then we found the stairwell. It spiraled down into the basement, and though every bone in my body told me not to go, Tyler insisted. "That's where the real shit happens," he said, his grin too wide. None of us wanted to look like cowards, so we followed. The basement was different. The moment we stepped off the stairs, our flashlights flickered, dimming like their batteries were dying all at once. The floor was damp, puddles of stagnant water reflecting fractured light. Pipes groaned above us, and somewhere far off, a door slammed on its own. We walked slowly, passing old therapy rooms with smashed mirrors and rusting cabinets filled with yellowed papers that crumbled at our touch. It was in one of those rooms that we found the chair. It sat in the center, bolted to the floor, leather straps hanging loose, a cracked metal helmet connected to wires dangling from the ceiling. "Electroshock therapy," Tyler muttered, whistling low. But it wasn't just the chair. On the walls surrounding it, scratched deep into the concrete, were words repeated over and over. "Let me out." The girls wanted to leave then, and so did I, but Tyler was stubborn. He sat down in the chair, pretending to struggle against the straps. "Come on," he laughed. "Say cheese." He pulled out his phone to take a selfie, but before he could snap it, the lights in the room flickered violently. For a split second, I swear I saw someone standing behind him. A tall figure in a hospital gown, face obscured by shadows, hands resting on Tyler's shoulders like it was proud of him. Then the light steadied and it was gone. We screamed at Tyler to get up, and he did, though he looked pale, shaken. "Okay," he said, his voice tight. "Let's get out of here." But when we turned back to the hall, the way we came, it wasn't there. The hallway had shifted. Instead of a staircase, there was just more corridor stretching into darkness. Panic set in. We ran blindly, our flashlights swinging, our breaths ragged. Every hallway looked the same: peeling paint, broken doors, endless shadows. Worse, the deeper we went, the more we heard. Whispers, faint at first, then louder, overlapping voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Some begged for help, others laughed. A low, guttural sound that didn't feel human. At one point, Janelle screamed. She had fallen behind, her flashlight beam cutting wildly through the dark. We turned just in time to see her being pulled into one of the rooms, her nails clawing at the frame as something yanked her into the shadows. Her screams echoed, then cut off all at once. When we ran inside, the room was empty. Not even footprints in the dust. We didn't speak after that. We just ran. Somehow we finally stumbled onto the stairwell again, bursting up the steps and out into the night air like drowning swimmers breaking the surface. But when we reached the fence, only 3 of us were left. Janelle was gone. Tyler wouldn't stop shaking, Melissa wouldn't stop crying, and I couldn't stop looking back at the asylum. Because in one of the top floor windows, a figure stood watching us. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown, its hand pressed to the glass. And even from that distance, I swear I could see the words scratched into the pane. "Let me out." We told the police the next morning, but they found nothing. No sign of Janelle, no footprints, no recent activity, nothing. They said she probably ran away. But I know what I saw. I know what took her. And sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see her face reflected in the dark, mouth open in a scream that never ends. The worst part? A week later, I got a photo sent to my phone from an unknown number. It was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It was Janelle, strapped to the chair in that basement, eyes wide, mouth sewn shut. There's a lighthouse in St. Augustine that most tourists pass by without a second glance. Built in the early 1800s, it's tall, whitewashed, perched on a jagged cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The town calls it historic, picturesque, a piece of living history. But locals have whispered for decades about the last keeper, a man named Elias Crow, who vanished one stormy night in 1927. They say his spirit still haunts the lighthouse, waiting for someone to come close enough to witness the truth. I first heard the story when I was working as a summer intern at a local history museum. The old curator, a frail woman with eyes like ice, pulled me aside one evening. "Don't go near the lighthouse after dark," she warned, her voice low and urgent. "Not alone. Not if you want to sleep at night. Some stories. They aren't meant for the living." I laughed it off, a nervous chuckle, because of course I had to see it for myself. Curiosity always wins, right? The first night I went, I parked my car at the base and walked up the winding path to the lighthouse. The moon was full, clouds scudding across it, casting long, flickering shadows over the jagged rocks. The wind was cold, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed, and for the first few minutes I thought it was just a quiet night by the water. But as I drew closer, I noticed something odd. The windows of the lighthouse glowed faintly, an amber light flickering like a candle, though it had been decommissioned decades ago. I hesitated, flashlight in hand, peering through the rusted gate. That's when I heard it. A soft humming. Not music exactly, but a tone, low and monotone, like someone singing numbers under their breath. Hesitant, I climbed the outer steps to the lighthouse door. The humming stopped as soon as I reached the threshold. I pushed the door, and it creaked open, revealing darkness inside, thick and almost tactile, like a fog that swallowed light. The staircase spiraled upward, each step groaning under my weight. I followed the narrow stone corridor, flashlight beam bouncing off the walls, revealing peeling paint, rusted railings, and strange stains that darkened the stone. Higher and higher I went, the wind howling outside, the ocean waves crashing against the cliff in long, thunderous roars. And then I saw him. Elias Crow, or at least his shadow, standing at the top of the staircase. His face was pale, almost chalky, eyes deep hollows that reflected the flashlight like twin moons. He wore the keeper's uniform, faded and moth-eaten, and clutched a lantern in one skeletal hand. But it wasn't the appearance that froze me. It was the movement. He didn't walk down the stairs. He didn't come toward me. He emerged from the walls like the stone itself had birthed him. I froze, every instinct screaming to run, but my legs refused to move. Crow raised his lantern slowly. The light flickered and revealed something behind him. Dozens of shadowy figures pressed into the walls themselves, faces contorted in silent screams, bodies twisted as if trapped mid-motion. And as I watched, I realized they weren't just shadows. They were the people who had vanished from St. Augustine over the last century, all those tourists, fishermen, and townsfolk never found. And now, they were part of the lighthouse, bound to the keeper. "Why are you here?" a voice rasped, as hollow as dry leaves. It was Crow, speaking without moving his lips. "This is no place for the living." I stumbled backward, heart pounding, tripping over the stone steps. My flashlight skittered across the floor, and for a moment, everything went black. When the light returned, Crow was closer, the walls behind him writhing with faces and hands pushing outward as if trying to escape. I turned to run, but the staircase had vanished. There was only the top floor, open to the cliffside, the waves screaming below. The wind picked up, howling like the voices of those trapped souls. Crow's lantern floated toward me, illuminating my face, and I swear I saw something in my own reflection in its glass. A shadow stretching behind me, reaching for my throat. I screamed and lunged forward, and the next moment I was outside, the cliff empty and silent, the lighthouse dark as if nothing had happened. I drove home shaking, my hands tight on the wheel, but the nightmares didn't stop. Every night I hear the lantern swinging in the dark, the humming of numbers, the low whispers of trapped souls. Sometimes I wake to find my own shadow in impossible positions, reaching, waiting. Last week I went back to St. Augustine to take pictures for work. I parked near the lighthouse at dusk, trying to rationalize my fear, and there at the top window a lantern flickered again. The wind carried a soft humming, counting. 1, 2, 3. I didn't stay to hear more. But here's the thing I can't escape. That night, when I returned to my hotel, I checked my photos. In one picture, taken before I even realized it, there was a figure at the base of my bed, pale, uniformed, holding a lantern, crow, smiling at the camera. And behind him, pressed against the walls, dozens of faces staring straight at me. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never believed cemeteries could be haunted in the way people describe. I grew up in a small Midwestern town where the cemetery was just another patch of land, rows of old stones, some dating back to the 1800s, surrounded by rusted iron gates and oak trees that seemed older than time itself. For years, it was just the place we drove past on the way to the grocery store, or where the town held Memorial Day ceremonies. It wasn't until my senior year of high school that I discovered there was something deeply wrong with that place, and it's only now, years later, that I feel ready to share what really happened. Back then, I had this reckless streak. You know the kind teenagers have when they think nothing can hurt them, when every dare feels like an opportunity to prove themselves. My group of friends, Tyler, Jess, and Mark, were the same way. We spent weekends driving around back roads, sneaking into abandoned houses, and scaring each other with urban legends. But the one place we never actually stepped foot into was Greenfield Cemetery. It was too close to town, too easy for adults to catch us in. The cops made a big deal out of kids trespassing there. People said it was out of respect for the dead, but deep down, everyone in our town knew it was more than that. Stories circulated about strange lights, whispers in the dark, figures standing by gravestones that vanished when you blinked. But of course, we laughed it off. It was late October when Tyler suggested the idea. The air was cold enough that our breath came out in little clouds, and the leaves had turned brittle, crunching under our sneakers. Tyler had borrowed his brother's car and said, "We should do something crazy before Halloween. One last adventure." That's when he proposed sneaking into Greenfield Cemetery at midnight. At first, we joked about it. Jess rolled her eyes, Mark pretended to shiver dramatically, but none of us said no. And that silence was enough. When the night finally came, I remember feeling this strange mix of excitement and unease. The moon was thin, barely a sliver, and the whole sky looked bruised with dark clouds. We parked a block away to avoid attention, and walked the rest of the way, flashlights in hand. The gate was locked, but Mark had thought ahead. He knew a part of the iron fence where one of the bars had been bent outward years ago. We squeezed through, scraping our jackets against the metal, and suddenly we were inside. The air was different there. It was colder, heavier, like the air in a basement that hasn't been opened in years. My flashlight beam cut across weathered headstones, some cracked, others leaning like they were bowing toward the earth. The trees creaked in the wind, and I swear I could hear faint whispers, but I told myself it was just the leaves rustling. We tried to act casual, joking quietly, but every sound seemed amplified. The snap of a twig, the crunch of gravel, even our own breathing. We wandered deeper, past newer graves into the oldest part of the cemetery. That's when Jess noticed something odd. "Look," she whispered, pointing at a row of stones that seemed cleaner than the others. At first I thought maybe they'd been restored, but when we got closer we realized they weren't just clean. They were polished, shining almost unnaturally under our flashlight beams. The names carved into them were perfectly legible, though the dates were from the 1800s. Mark bent down to run his fingers across one of the names, and as he did, I noticed something that made my stomach flip. The ground beneath the stone looked disturbed, like it had been dug up and filled in again. But recently, the dirt was looser, darker than the untouched grass around it. I didn't say anything, though. I just wanted to get through the night without chickening out. We kept walking, and that's when we saw it. A faint light moving between the graves. It wasn't steady like a flashlight, more like a lantern swaying gently in someone's hand. Tyler, always the brave one, grinned and said, "Probably just some old caretaker. Let's hide." We ducked behind a large stone angel whose face had eroded into something almost skull-like. My heart hammered in my chest as the light drew closer. But there was no sound, no footsteps, no rustle of clothes. Just the light, drifting silently, weaving between the graves as though searching for something. I held my breath until it passed, and when I finally looked at my friends, I saw the same fear mirrored in their eyes. None of us had the courage to follow it. Instead, we decided to turn back. That's when everything went wrong. The path we'd taken in seemed unfamiliar now. Every row of stones looked the same, every tree twisted into shapes I swore hadn't been there before. We argued quietly about which way to go, our nerves fraying. Tyler insisted we keep walking straight while Jess swore we needed to veer left. Finally, in frustration, I said, "Look, let's just climb the fence and get out anywhere we can." But when we reached the edge, there was no fence, just more graves stretching into the darkness. Panic set in. It didn't make sense. We hadn't walked that far. We tried retracing our steps, but the more we moved, the deeper we seemed to go. That's when we noticed the headstones. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but when I shone my light on them, my blood ran cold. They bore our names. Mine, Jess's, Tyler's, Mark's. All carved into the stone with the current year etched as the date of death. Jess screamed. Mark cursed under his breath, kicking at the dirt like he could erase the engraving. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. We were standing in our own graves. And then from the silence came a sound I'll never forget. The slow, dragging scrape of something heavy being pulled across stone. It echoed through the cemetery, closer, then fading, then closer again, as if circling us. Our flashlights flickered one by one, until only mine remained, casting a weak cone of light that barely cut through the shadows. We huddled together, too terrified to move, waiting for something, anything, to reveal itself. And then it did. A figure stepped into the light. At first I thought it was a man, tall and thin, holding that same lantern we'd seen earlier. But as he lifted his head, I saw his face, or rather the lack of one. His skin was smooth, featureless except for a mouth stretched impossibly wide, grinning with rows of blackened teeth. He raised a hand, bony and claw-like, and pointed directly at me. That's when I blacked out. I woke up at dawn, lying outside the cemetery gates on the gravel road. My clothes were damp with dew, and my flashlight was gone. Tyler, Jess, and Mark were there too, scattered a few feet away, all unconscious but breathing. None of us spoke on the walk back to the car. None of us spoke for weeks after, in fact. It was like we'd made some silent agreement to never mention it again. But here's the part that still haunts me. A month later, the town paper ran a short article about Greenfield Cemetery. Apparently, vandals had been caught digging up graves, but when police arrived, they found something strange. 4 open plots with freshly carved stones bearing unfamiliar names. The article listed those names, and they were ours. The newspaper said the stones had been removed, and the police chalked it up to some elaborate prank. But I know better. I've never gone back to that cemetery, never even driven past it again. Still sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I see that faceless man with the lantern, pointing at me with that awful grin. And I wonder if one day, when I least expect it, he'll come to claim me for real. I've always been fascinated by cemeteries. Not in a morbid way, at least not at first. I used to find them peaceful, quiet places where you could sit with your thoughts, away from the chaos of daily life. My grandmother, who raised me after my parents died, was buried in a small cemetery outside of Richmond, Virginia. I'd visit her grave every Sunday after church, bringing fresh flowers, sometimes even sitting for an hour just talking to her. I know how that sounds, but it made me feel less alone. But something happened 2 years ago that changed how I see cemeteries forever. It's not easy to write this, Part of me still questions whether it was real, or if my mind broke under grief and exhaustion. Still, I can't shake the memory, and sometimes late at night I hear things that remind me of that night. Things that make me believe it wasn't just in my head. It started after I lost my job. I was already struggling with rent and bills, and when the layoffs came, I spiraled. Visiting my grandmother's grave became my only comfort. I'd go late at night when no one was around, sitting cross-legged on the grass, whispering about my problems as though she could still hear me. It was stupid, maybe even unhealthy, but it felt like the only place I belonged. One night, after drinking too much whiskey, I decided to visit her grave around midnight. I don't remember what compelled me. It was raining, cold, the kind of night where even the roads seemed deserted. Still, I drove out there, parked by the rusted gate, and stumbled inside with my jacket pulled tight. The cemetery was drenched in shadows, the headstones slick with rain, reflecting the dim glow of the street lamp at the entrance. I found her grave easily. I always did. I knelt there, rain soaking through my jeans, and started talking. At first it was just venting. How lost I felt, how angry I was at the world. But as the whiskey loosened my tongue, my words turned darker. I started saying things I shouldn't have, things like, I wish I could just stay here with you. I don't want to leave anymore. This world has nothing for me. I pressed my hand to the cold stone, tears mixing with the rain. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Soft at first, almost like the rain was shaping itself into words. I froze, my hand still resting on the stone. Then I heard it again. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. A whisper. It sounded like my grandmother's voice, coming from beneath the ground. My heart thudded in my chest, and I leaned closer, ear nearly pressed to the stone. The whisper grew clearer. She was calling my name. Her voice was weak, strained, like she was struggling to breathe. Come down. Come down with me. I stumbled back, nearly slipping in the mud. My brain tried to rationalize. Maybe it was the wind, maybe I was drunk and imagining it. But then I heard something else. A scratching. Like fingernails clawing at wood, muffled but frantic, coming from directly below me. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to. But my legs wouldn't move. I stared at the grave, and for a moment, I swore I saw the soil shift, just slightly, like something was pressing upward from inside the coffin. And then, I did the stupidest thing imaginable. I spoke back. Grandma? My voice shook. Is that you? The whisper answered immediately, louder this time, clearer. Yes, I'm here. Help me out. My skin crawled, but at the same time, tears burned my eyes. I wanted to believe it. I wanted so badly for it to be her. Against all reason, I clawed at the muddy ground with my bare hands, digging like an animal. My nails broke, mud caked under my skin, but I couldn't stop. The whisper grew urgent, desperate. Faster. Faster. The scratching from below grew louder, like something was slamming against the coffin lid. Suddenly, a beam of light hit me. Hey, what the hell are you doing? I looked up, blinking against the brightness. A security guard stood at the edge of the path, flashlight trained on me. My heart hammered in panic. I must have looked insane, covered in mud, kneeling at a half-dug grave. I heard her, I stammered. She's in there, she's alive. The guard frowned and hurried over, grabbing me by the arm. There's no one in there, you need to leave right now. I struggled against him, screaming that he didn't understand, that I'd heard her voice. But he dragged me back to the gate and shoved me outside, muttering about calling the cops if he ever saw me there again. I drove home in silence, shaking, muddy, drunk, and confused. By the time morning came, I convinced myself it had been the whiskey playing tricks on me. I promised I'd never go back at night again. But of course I broke that promise. About a week later, sober this time, I felt this pull to return. It wasn't just longing. It was like something was calling me. Against every ounce of common sense, I went back around 11 p.m. The cemetery was silent, the air heavy with fog. I walked straight to my grandmother's grave, heart pounding. And there it was again, the whisper. But this time, it wasn't just one voice. Dozens of whispers rose from the earth around me, weaving together in a chorus of breathy, broken pleas. Some called my name, others begged for help, some just cried. The sound swelled until it felt like the entire ground beneath me was alive, writhing with trapped voices. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. It grew louder, pressing into my skull. Then I heard hers. My grandmother's voice, clear above the rest. "Come with me, it's better down here, you don't have to suffer anymore." The soil at her grave began to sink, slowly collapsing inward like something was pulling it from below. A foul stench rose with it. Rot, damp earth, something sickly sweet that made me gag. I stumbled backward, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, this isn't real." And then I saw her. A pale hand broke through the soil, reaching upward, fingers clawing at the air. My grandmother's hand. I recognized the gold wedding band she'd been buried with. My entire body went cold. The hand twisted unnaturally, fingers snapping backward as if pulled by invisible strings. Then another hand emerged, then a face. But it wasn't her face. It looked like her at first, the same soft features, the same kind eyes. But as it rose higher, the skin seemed to rot away, sagging and splitting to reveal blackened teeth and hollow sockets where eyes should have been. The thing smiled, tilting its head as if studying me, and whispered in her voice, "Stay." I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the cemetery, lungs burning, until I burst through the gate and collapsed on the gravel road. I never went back. I moved to another city within a month, left everything behind. I even stopped visiting graves altogether. But sometimes at night, when everything is quiet, I still hear that whisper. And the last time I heard it, I wasn't alone. My girlfriend was asleep beside me, and she bolted upright with wide, terrified eyes. Before I could even ask what was wrong, she whispered, "Why did your grandmother just call my name?" I've always been the kind of person who thinks logic explains everything. Shadows in the corner of your eye, just your brain misfiring. Strange noises at night, pipes, wind, or some other dull reason. So when people in my town whispered about the haunted cemetery at Pine Hollow, I rolled my eyes. Ghost stories, I thought, nothing more. That cemetery sat on the edge of town, tucked behind a line of tall pines that blocked it from the main road. People said it was built on land taken from a native tribe 2 centuries ago, that the graves weren't properly consecrated, that restless spirits lingered. But for me, it was just another patch of earth with stones on it. That changed last winter, when my uncle died. He wasn't close family, we barely spoke, and honestly I didn't like him much. But he had no wife, no kids, and no one else to claim him. So the responsibility fell on me to handle his burial. I hated that it had to be in Pine Hollow of all places, but the funeral director said plots there were cheap and available. It was practical, and I didn't believe the rumors anyway. The burial was quiet, with just me, the preacher, and 2 gravediggers. The ground was frozen, the wind sharp enough to sting my cheeks. Afterward, when everyone else left, I lingered a bit, standing over the fresh mound of dirt. Something about the way the soil looked bothered me. It wasn't just uneven. It pulsed slightly, like there was something moving beneath. I chalked it up to exhaustion and left quickly. The next night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned until nearly 3 a.m., when my phone buzzed. The number was unknown. Against my better judgment, I answered. The line crackled, and at first all I heard was static. Then a voice whispered my name. I froze. It was my uncle's voice. "You left me there," he rasped, like his throat was filled with dirt. "Come back. Dig me out." I hung up immediately, heart pounding. My rational brain screamed that it had to be a sick prank, someone messing with me after the burial. but my gut told me otherwise. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I drove past Pine Hollow just to calm myself. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the graves in white. But my uncle's plot looked wrong. The snow covering it was thinner, already melted in strange patches as though heat radiated from beneath. My stomach twisted. I tried to move on, to bury myself in work, but the calls kept coming. Every night, always around 3 a.m., my uncle's voice, growing clearer, angrier. Sometimes he begged, sometimes he accused me, and sometimes he just laughed, a low, gurgling laugh that didn't sound human. I stopped answering, but the voicemails piled up, filling my phone with recordings of his rasping voice. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I'd prove it was a hoax. I'd go back to Pine Hollow at night, see the grave with my own eyes, and put this to rest. So one night in February, I drove there around midnight. The cemetery was silent, the snow crunching beneath my boots as I walked between the rows. My flashlight beam swung over the stones, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch when I wasn't looking directly at them. When I reached my uncle's grave, my breath caught. The mound of soil was gone. The ground had sunken inward, like the coffin below had collapsed. And carved into the snow above was a word, my name. Each letter jagged, scraped into the ice with something sharp. I should have left. God, I should have. But I felt this magnetic pull, like something beneath that sunken earth was calling to me. Against all reason, I dropped to my knees and began clawing at the frozen dirt with my bare hands. My nails cracked, my skin tore, but I kept digging. And then, about a foot down, my fingers hit wood. A coffin. I fumbled with the lid, my body trembling until it gave way with a groan. Inside, I expected my uncle's corpse, cold and lifeless. But the coffin was empty. No body. Just darkness. And then I heard it. Breathing. Right behind me. I whipped around, flashlight beam shaking. At first, I saw nothing. Just graves, trees, shadows. But then, at the far edge of the cemetery, something moved. A figure, tall and thin, standing unnaturally still. Its face was obscured, but I recognized the outline of my uncle's coat, the one he'd been buried in. "Why did you let me die?" the figure whispered, though its lips didn't move. The sound came from everywhere, rattling inside my skull. I stumbled back, falling into the half-dug grave. The figure began to move, not walking but gliding toward me, its body jerking in unnatural motions like a puppet. My flashlight flickered, dimming until only slivers of light remained. I scrambled to climb out of the pit, dirt crumbling beneath my boots. But as I reached the edge, a hand shot out of the soil and grabbed my ankle. Not my uncle's hand. This one was rotted, skeletal, the flesh hanging in strips. Another hand followed, then another, clawing their way out of the ground around me. Dozens of them breaking through the soil like the earth itself was giving birth to the dead. I screamed, kicking free, and sprinted toward the gate. The whispers rose into a cacophony, voices layered on top of each other, all screaming my name. The figure in my uncle's coat stood frozen at the center of it all, grinning now, though its face was collapsing inward, skin peeling away to reveal something black and endless beneath. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I slammed the door, shaking, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, but then the radio clicked on by itself. Through the static, I heard his voice again. My uncle's voice. Calm this time, almost gentle. "Don't worry," he said. "You'll be with me soon." The line went dead. I left town the next morning, changed my number, got rid of the phone entirely. But the calls didn't stop, they just changed. Now when I sleep, I hear the ring in my dreams. I hear his voice whispering through the static. And sometimes when I wake, there's dirt under my nails. When I was younger, I worked nights as a groundskeeper for a cemetery just outside Chicago. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. And honestly, I didn't mind the solitude. My job was simple. Keep the grass trimmed, clear away debris, make sure vandals weren't sneaking in after dark. Most nights, nothing happened at all. I'd sit in the little caretaker's shack by the gates, sip coffee, and read while the hours ticked by. But there was one section of the cemetery that always made me uneasy. The old northern lot where the stones were cracked and half sunk into the earth, some of them so weathered the names were illegible. It hadn't been used in decades, and the city barely bothered maintaining it. The headstones leaned like crooked teeth. The soil was uneven, and a line of skeletal trees cast jagged shadows across the graves. I usually avoided that part of the grounds at night. It wasn't superstition, at least not at first. It was just the way the air felt there. Heavy, still, almost watchful. One winter night, though, I didn't have a choice. A storm had blown through earlier in the evening, and a tree had fallen across the north fence. The supervisor called me and said I had to check for damage. So around 2 a.m., bundled in layers of clothes, flashlight in hand, I trudged through the snow toward the northern lot. The path was dark, my boots crunching in the frozen slush. My breath plumed in the air like smoke. When I reached the northern graves, I immediately noticed something odd. The fallen tree was there, its branches sprawling over several headstones. But the snow around it was disturbed, not just where it had landed, but all around in wide, sweeping arcs. Almost like something had been dragged across the ground. I frowned, shining my light across the graves. That's when I saw it. Footprints. Dozens of them, pressed deep into the snow. Bare footprints. The kind you'd expect from someone walking without shoes, toes splayed, heel marks sharp. They led away from the tree, weaving between the stones, circling them. Every hair on my neck rose. I followed the tracks, half convinced it had to be kids messing around. But the longer I looked, the less sense it made. Some of the prints were huge, others impossibly small, like a child's. And they weren't all upright. Some were pressed sideways, hands alongside them, as if whoever made them had crawled on all fours. I told myself to turn back, to report it in the morning and let someone else deal with it. But my curiosity got the better of me. I kept following the trail until it ended at a massive, cracked mausoleum near the edge of the lot. I'd always hated that mausoleum. The stone was blackened with age, the door rusted shut, the nameplate worn smooth by decades of rain. No one ever visited it, not in the years I'd worked there. It was just forgotten. But the footprints stopped right in front of it. Dozens of them, pressed into the snow like they'd gathered at the entrance. And the door, which had been sealed for as long as I could remember, was slightly ajar. Against every ounce of reason, I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Not the dry, dusty smell I expected, but something wet. Rotten. Cloying. My flashlight beam swept across cracked stone walls, broken shelves where coffins should have been stacked. But the shelves were empty. Every single one. And the floor. The floor was covered in prints. Bare, wet prints staining the stone. I froze, my pulse thundering in my ears. Then from deep inside the mausoleum I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Breathing. Shallow. Ragged, but unmistakable. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The breathing stopped. I backed out slowly, pulling the door shut. But before it closed completely, I caught a glimpse of something. A face. Pale, half-rotted, pressed against the far wall, staring at me with empty sockets where eyes should have been. Its mouth opened, stretching impossibly wide, but no sound came out. I slammed the door and bolted, running across the lot until my lungs burned. When I finally reached the shack, I locked the door, turned off my light, and sat there shaking until morning. I told myself it was a hallucination. Stress, maybe even carbon monoxide poisoning from the heater in the shack. But when the sun came up and I went back with my supervisor, the mausoleum door was sealed again. Rusted tight, as if it had never been touched. I tried to move on, but the nightmare started almost immediately. I'd dream of the footprints, the mausoleum, the pale face staring out. In the dreams, I was the one lying in the coffin. banging on the lid while muffled voices whispered outside. A few weeks later, something worse happened. I was on duty again, dozing in the shack, when a sound woke me. Not wind, not animals. A knock. 3 sharp knocks, right on the shack door. I froze, heart hammering. Nobody came to the cemetery at 3 a.m. Slowly I stood, grabbed my flashlight, and opened the door. No one was there. But in the snow leading up to the shack were the same footprints I'd seen before. Bare, wet, dozens of them pressed deep into the drifts. They circled the shack, looping around and around as if something had been pacing all night. I quit that job the next morning, packed my things, told my supervisor I couldn't do it anymore. I moved 2 towns over and started working construction. For a while, things were normal. But then, one night, I woke to the sound of knocking. Not at the door this time, at my bedroom window. 3 sharp knocks. I pulled back the curtain, heart in my throat. There were footprints in the frost on the glass. Bare, wet footprints, pressed from the inside.
They said it was harmless, just a study, a chance to make easy money. That's how the letter described it when it arrived in my mailbox. Volunteers needed 30-day sleep study, $50,000 compensation, confidential government research. I was broke, drowning in debt, and 1 eviction notice away from living on the streets. So when I read the words $50,000, I didn't hesitate. I filled out the application that same night. A week later, a black van pulled up outside my apartment at 3 a.m. 2 men in suits stepped out. They didn't ask questions. They just handed me a blindfold and said, "Come with us." That was the first red flag. But by then, I was already inside. The facility. The van drove for hours. I had no idea where we were, no windows, no sense of direction. When the blindfold finally came off, I found myself in an underground facility. The place felt wrong. The walls were smooth, gray concrete, the air sharp with the smell of antiseptic. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, far too bright for comfort. There were 7 of us in total, strangers, all looking just as confused as I was. A young woman with piercings who kept biting her lip. A middle-aged man in a business suit, sweating through his collar. 2 college kids who wouldn't stop whispering to each other. A tall, gaunt man with a twitch under his eye. And a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days already. They gave us uniforms, plain white clothes like hospital scrubs, and led us to a large common room. There were no windows, just cameras in every corner. Then came the rules. The rules. A doctor in a pristine lab coat stood before us. His face was pale, his eyes sharp behind small glasses. He never smiled. "You have all volunteered for the National Sleep Deprivation Research Program," he said. "The objective is simple. You will remain awake for 30 days. No sleep whatsoever. In return, each of you will receive $50,000 upon completion." One of the college kids laughed. "That's it? Just stay awake? Easy money, man." The doctor's lips curled into something that might have been a smile but wasn't. "To ensure compliance, the following measures will be taken," he continued. "The lights will remain on at all times. No beds, couches, or pillows will be provided. Stimulants will be administered if you show signs of fatigue. If you fall asleep, you will be removed from the program." He paused, letting the silence hang before adding, "Removed permanently." We all exchanged nervous glances. "Surely you mean disqualified, right?" the man in the business suit asked. The doctor adjusted his glasses. "Of course." But the way he said it made my stomach twist. Day 1, hour 12. The first 12 hours were almost fun. We were given food, water, and puzzles to pass the time. A television played static-filled old movies none of us recognized. The college kids joked about pulling all-nighters for exams. The woman with piercings drummed her fingers against the table. I kept pacing, trying to burn off the unease crawling under my skin. Every wall had a camera. Every movement was being watched. At some point, the gaunt man muttered under his breath, "This isn't a study, it's a prison." None of us responded. Day 2, Hour 36. Sleep deprivation hits faster than you think. By the second day, our bodies ached, our eyes burned, and conversations slurred into nonsense. The doctors, there were at least 5 of them, always silent, always watching, administered pills that jolted us awake, filling our veins with restless energy. That night, or what we thought was night, we heard something strange, a scratching sound. It came from the vents, faint but persistent, like nails dragging across metal. The woman who already looked exhausted froze, staring at the ceiling. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. We all did. The college kids laughed nervously, saying it was just rats. But the sound didn't stop. It moved, above us, around us, until it seemed to circle the entire room. Then suddenly, silence. We told ourselves it was nothing. But the cameras in the corners seemed to tilt ever so slightly, as if watching how we reacted. Day 3. Hour 60. By now, our minds were unraveling. The man in the business suit began talking to himself, mumbling numbers under his breath. The woman with piercings started scratching her arms raw, leaving red streaks. Me? I kept seeing things in the corner of my vision, shadows that weren't there, figures standing just beyond the light. At one point, I swore I saw someone sitting at the table who wasn't part of our group. A man with no face. He was just there for a moment, and then gone. When I mentioned it, the others fell silent. Then the gaunt man leaned close and whispered, "Don't talk about them. That's how they notice you." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. Day 4. Hour 80. That's when the first one disappeared. The woman who looked exhausted from the beginning, her name was Mara, collapsed against the wall, mumbling incoherently. Her eyes rolled back, her body twitching. We shouted for help. The cameras whirred. Within seconds, the door hissed open, and 2 men in black entered. They strapped her to a stretcher, wheeling her out without a word. The business suit man demanded answers, screaming at the cameras. "Where are you taking her?" No response. The door sealed shut again, and Mara was gone. But that night, as I tried to keep my eyes open, I heard something that made my blood run cold. From the vents above, Mara's voice, soft, broken, whispering my name. What if the voices you hear at night aren't in your head, but in the walls? At first, I told myself it wasn't real. That exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But when I whispered to the others the next morning, quietly, carefully, they admitted something terrifying. They had heard Mara too. The woman with piercings, whose name I finally learned was Tessa, said she heard her own name being whispered. Not by Mara, but by someone else. The business suit man, Graham, confessed that during the night he felt someone breathing on his neck while he sat at the table. When he spun around, no one was there. None of us slept, but all of us were dreaming. Day 5, hour 100. By the 5th day, the room had changed. Not physically, same concrete walls, same humming lights, same cameras, but it felt different, colder, darker, heavier. The scratching in the vents returned. This time it wasn't faint, it was loud, aggressive. Something was up there, something alive. The gaunt man, his name was Victor, stood beneath the vent, staring at it with wide, bloodshot eyes. "They're testing us," he whispered. "Not for science, for endurance, for control." I asked him what he meant. He leaned so close I could smell the rot on his breath. "They're trying to peel us open, strip away what makes us human. Once you lose sleep, the mind stops protecting you, and they slip in." Before I could ask who they were, Graham interrupted by slamming his fist on the table. "This is insane," he shouted at the cameras. "We want out. Do you hear me? I quit." We all froze. The words "I quit" seemed to echo around the room, swallowed by silence. The door hissed open. 2 men in black walked in, their faces expressionless. Without hesitation, they grabbed Graham. He fought, screaming, punching, begging. But they dragged him out like he weighed nothing. The door slammed shut. The cameras turned toward us, watching. None of us said a word. Day 6, hour 1:20. There were only 5 of us left now. Tessa wouldn't stop pacing. The college kids, Ethan and Riley, were pale and quiet, whispering things I couldn't hear. Victor stared at the vents, muttering to himself in another language. I tried to hold on, tried to remind myself it was just a study, that there was money waiting at the end. But every time I closed my eyes, even for a blink, I saw things that didn't belong. Flashes of rooms I'd never been in, people I didn't know, a figure standing just beyond the light, faceless, waiting. The whispers grew worse. That night, I heard Graham, his voice thin and broken, begging, "Don't let them take me back in there." Day 7, hour 1:44. We were cracking. Riley suddenly screamed in the middle of eating, throwing his food against the wall. "It's moving! The floor is moving!" He dropped to his knees, clawing at the concrete like something was beneath it. When Ethan tried to stop him, Riley turned violent, swinging wildly until Victor pulled them apart. Riley's nails bled from scratching the floor. He wouldn't stop muttering, "It's hollow, hollow underneath." The doctors didn't come for him. Not yet. But the next morning, Riley was gone. No one saw him leave. No one saw the door open. He was just gone. And the cameras didn't move. Wait, hour 160. Ethan was broken. His brother was gone, and he refused to eat. He sat in the corner, knees to his chest, whispering prayers under his breath. Tessa tried to comfort him, but she was unraveling too. Her arms covered in fresh scratches, eyes darting everywhere like she expected the walls to collapse. That left me and Victor. He told me the truth that night, or at least what he believed was the truth. "This isn't the first experiment," he said, his voice low. "They've done this before, years ago, in Russia, in Poland, in Germany. The names change, but the experiment is always the same." I frowned. "What experiment?" "Sleep," he whispered. "They think sleep is a barrier, a wall between our world and theirs. Keep someone awake long enough, and the wall crumbles. Things slip through. Things that don't belong." He leaned closer. "That's why they don't let us sleep. They want to invite them in." I wanted to laugh, to call him insane. But deep down, I knew he was right. Because that night, when I blinked longer than I should have, I saw something crawl out of the vent. It wasn't human. It was pale, thin, with limbs too long and eyes that glowed faintly in the fluorescent light. It crept along the ceiling, pausing directly above Ethan, watching him tremble. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. When I looked again, it was gone. But Ethan began to scream. Day 9, hour 180. Ethan didn't last the day. He clawed at his own eyes, shrieking that he couldn't stop seeing them. His screams echoed through the room until his voice broke. The door opened. The men in black came. But this time, something was different. As they dragged Ethan out, I swear I saw the pale creature crouched in the doorway behind them, watching. And when the door slammed shut, the cameras turned, slowly, directly toward me. Day 10, hour 200. Only 3 of us remained. Me, Tessa, and Victor. Tessa was losing herself. She scratched words into the wall with her nails, bloody letters that made no sense. "Let them in. Let them in. Let them in." Victor didn't try to stop her. He only watched. And me? I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't a sleep study. It wasn't about science. It was about sacrifice. They weren't testing how long we could stay awake. They were testing how long it took before the barrier broke, before the creatures on the other side clawed their way in. And we were the bait. That night, I lay on the cold concrete, staring at the ceiling. The scratching in the vents was louder than ever. And then, a whisper. So close, it felt like it was inside my head. It wasn't Mara. It wasn't Graham. It wasn't anyone I knew. It was me. My own voice whispering from the vent. "You don't leave here alive." What if the thing whispering your name was you. By the 10th night, I no longer trusted my own senses. Hunger gnawed at me. My skin itched like something crawled beneath it. And the whispers, God, the whispers, never stopped. They echoed inside the vents, inside my skull, bleeding into every thought. Tessa sat in the corner, rocking back and forth, her arms covered in fresh wounds. She scratched herself so badly that blood dripped down her wrists, pooling on the floor. She didn't even flinch. Victor, however, looked calm. Too calm. He sat upright, staring straight at the cameras. "They're watching," he said suddenly. We all knew it, but something in his voice made me shiver. "Not just the doctors," he continued. "Them, the ones we let in." I forced a laugh. "You mean the shadows?" Victor didn't blink. "Not shadows. Predators." He pointed at the corner of the ceiling. "One is there right now. You don't see it because you don't want to, but it sees you." Day 11. Hour 2:20. That day, the food trays were late. Hours passed with nothing but the flicker of fluorescent lights and the sound of our stomachs growling. When the door finally opened, only one tray slid through. For 3 people. Tessa lunged at it, tearing into the bread and fruit like a starving animal. Victor let her eat. He just watched, his sunken eyes fixed on me. "You notice it too, don't you?" he asked softly. I swallowed. "Notice what?" "That it's all intentional. Less food, more hunger, the stress, the fear. It breaks us down faster, makes us easier to..." He trailed off. "Easier to what?" I demanded. His lips curled into a strange, crooked smile. "Easier to enter." The walls breathe. That night, the room felt alive. I know how insane that sounds, but the air shifted in pulses, as if the walls themselves were breathing. Every exhale carried the scent of rot and damp soil. The scratches in the vents weren't distant anymore. They were right above us, sharp, frantic, like claws on metal. Tessa screamed suddenly, pointing at the far wall. "There! It's coming through! Do you see it?" I turned, and for a split second, I did see it. The wall bulged outward, stretching like something was pressing from the other side. The concrete cracked, fine lines splintering outward. Then just as quickly, it was gone. Tessa clawed at her face, sobbing hysterically. "They're here! They're here!" The cameras zoomed in on her, recording every moment. The door never opened. No one came to take her. Day 12, hour 2:40. Tessa didn't last much longer. She stopped talking to us entirely, muttering only to the walls, scraping her nails against the concrete until they bled, whispering things like, "Not yet, not ready, soon." By evening, she was gone. Not taken, not screaming, just gone. One moment she was curled in the corner, scratching words into the wall. The next, the space was empty. No sound, no trace, as if she had been erased from reality itself. I turned to Victor, panicked. "Where is she?" He smiled faintly. "They claimed her." The visitors. Only Victor and I remained. And that night, I finally saw them clearly. The lights flickered, buzzing and humming. I blinked, and in that instant, shadows stretched unnaturally long. Figures emerged, thin, skeletal, skin pale as bone. Their movements jerky, unnatural, like broken puppets being dragged across strings. Their faces, if you could call them that, were warped. Eyes too large, mouths too wide, jaws distending as they breathed in sync with the flickering lights. One of them crouched directly over me, close enough to touch. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting me back at myself. But it wasn't me. It was wrong. An echo. A hollow version. I froze, too terrified to move. Victor didn't look afraid. He just whispered, "Don't fight them, that's what they want." The creature tilted its head, studying me like a predator deciding whether to strike. Then slowly, it crawled back into the darkness, melting into the corner until nothing remained. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only sit there shaking, while Victor chuckled softly. Day 13, hour 260. When I woke, if you can call it waking, I realized I wasn't sure anymore what was real. Had I fallen asleep? Had I dreamt the creatures? Or were they real, slipping between the moments I blinked? The cameras hummed above us, lenses clicking, always watching. Victor leaned close. His voice was barely a whisper. "They like you." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "They show themselves to you. That means they've chosen you." I shook my head. Chosen me for what? His smile widened, revealing cracked yellow teeth. To replace the ones who left. The break. By the end of the 13th day, I was breaking. My mind felt shredded, thoughts slipping through my grasp like water. The whispers were no longer confined to the vents. They were inside my skull, my own voice, my own words, but not mine. You won't leave. You belong here. You've always belonged here. At one point, I found myself standing at the door, scratching at the metal until my fingernails bent backward. I didn't even remember walking there. Victor pulled me away, laughing. "Not yet. They're not ready to open the door for you." I stared at him, horror flooding me. He wasn't afraid at all. He wasn't resisting. He was welcoming it. P14, hour 280. The cameras shifted again, their lenses focusing on me, zooming in. I could hear the faint click-click of the machinery adjusting. "They're documenting the transformation," Victor said casually, like we were part of a science project. "What transformation?" I snapped. He leaned back against the wall, eyes glassy, smile serene. "Into what they need us to be." I shook my head. "You're insane." His eyes locked on mine. "Then why haven't they taken me yet? Why am I still here?" I couldn't answer, because deep down, I knew he was right. That night, the whispers grew so loud I thought my skull would split. I pressed my hands to my ears, screaming, but it didn't matter, because the voice was mine. "You'll never sleep again." And when I opened my eyes, Victor was standing over me, smiling, his lips moving in perfect sync with the whispers inside my head. What if the only other survivor wasn't really human anymore? By the 14th night, Victor's smile haunted me more than the creatures. He didn't blink anymore. Didn't eat, didn't drink. He just sat there, calm, still, staring at me like he knew something I didn't. When I finally confronted him, my voice was hoarse, ragged from screaming against the whispers. "What are you?" He tilted his head, amused. "Same as you. A volunteer." "No," I snapped. "You're different. You don't sleep, you don't eat, you don't even break," he finished for me, grinning. My blood ran cold. The story he told. That night, Victor decided to talk. "Do you know why they picked us?" he asked, leaning closer. His eyes glittered in the harsh fluorescent light. I shook my head, clutching my arms to stop the trembling. "They don't choose randomly. They choose the desperate, the broken, people who won't be missed." He laughed softly. "You think you applied? That you signed up? No, they already knew you'd accept before you read the letter. That was just part of the test." I felt sick. "Test for what?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "To see who will survive the opening." I froze. "The opening?" Victor's smile widened, revealing cracked yellow teeth. "The wall between worlds. Sleep holds it shut, but starve the body of rest, and the cracks form. That's when they slip through. That's when we see them." I wanted to call him insane, but I couldn't, because I had seen them. Day 15, hour 300. The cameras watched everything. I began to notice a pattern. Every time the shadows appeared, the lenses zoomed in, whirring softly. They weren't just monitoring us, they were recording the creatures too. I pointed this out to Victor, but he only laughed. Of course, they want proof. Proof that the barrier can be broken, that we can survive contact. I shivered. Survive? You call this surviving? Victor leaned in so close I could smell the rot on his breath. It's only the beginning. The night without lights. On the 15th night, the fluorescent lights flickered and went out. For the first time since we arrived, the room was plunged into complete darkness. I froze, unable to see even my own hands. The silence was suffocating. Then, slowly, I heard it. Movement. Not one set of footsteps, dozens, maybe hundreds. Crawling, dragging, slithering across the concrete floor. I backed into the wall, my chest heaving, heart slamming against my ribs. And then, eyes. Dozens of glowing eyes blinking open in the black. Whispers swarmed, overlapping, hundreds of voices speaking at once. Some familiar, some not. All in my voice. Join us, become us. You already are us. Something cold brushed against my arm. Thin, bony fingers. I screamed, thrashing wildly, but the grip was unbreakable. The lights buzzed back on. And nothing was there. The room was empty. Silent. Except for Victor. Smiling. Victor's confession. After that, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I grabbed Victor by the collar, shaking him violently. "What are they?" I shouted. "What do they want?" He didn't resist. He only chuckled. They want what's always been theirs. Us. His eyes burned into mine. Do you really think sleep is natural? That shutting off your mind every night is just rest? No. Sleep is the barrier, the only defense your brain has against them, the only way to keep them out. I felt dizzy. My stomach lurched. That's not possible. Then why do you see them now? He whispered. I released him, stumbling back. My legs shook so badly I nearly collapsed. Victor stood tall, almost proud. They couldn't reach me before. But now I'm open. I let them in. I stared at him in horror. You mean you're one of them? His grin widened. Not yet, but soon. Day 16, hour 3:20. I stopped counting hours. Time dissolved into one endless nightmare. The whispers never stopped. The scratching grew louder, closer. Sometimes I swore I saw cracks spreading through the walls, faint lines glowing faintly with something dark on the other side. The food trays didn't come anymore. We were left with nothing. I collapsed on the floor, weak, trembling, my throat raw from thirst. I wanted to sleep so badly. Just close my eyes, even for a second. But I knew if I did, it wouldn't be sleep. It would be surrender. Victor crouched beside me, his eyes wild, his smile stretched too wide. They're almost through, he whispered. I can hear them scratching, can't you? I could. God help me, I could. The thing in the mirror. On the 17th day, something new appeared. The far wall shimmered, rippling like liquid. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, until I saw my reflection in it. But it wasn't me. It was pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched too wide. My reflection grinned at me, tilting its head in mockery. Behind it, in the reflection, stood dozens of figures, all of them faceless, all of them watching. I stumbled back, choking on my own breath. Victor only laughed. They're waiting for you, he said softly. For the moment you let go. I shut my eyes, but the reflection burned in my mind, etched like fire. The breaking point. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed my palms against the wall, whispering, "Please, just let me out. Please." The concrete was cold, but then it pulsed, warm, beating, like a heart. A voice whispered back, soft and sickeningly familiar. "You're already out. You just haven't realized it yet." I stumbled back, shaking violently. Victor was watching me with that same serene smile. "You see now," he said. "The door was never to the outside. The door was always inside us." He leaned closer, his voice breaking into a whisper that wasn't his. "And tonight, they'll walk through. Do you believe the human mind can survive without dreams? Or does it eventually devour itself? The question had been scrawled across the observation window in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. No one could say for sure when it appeared. One moment the glass was spotless, the next it bore that message. Slashed letters, jagged and uneven. Dr. Holloway stared at it for almost a full minute, motionless before whispering, They're trying to communicate. Except none of the subjects were near the glass. The writing was on the inside. The Descent. By day 11, the room was a nightmare factory. The smell was the first thing that hit the observers, an acidic blend of sweat, decay, and something metallic, like rusted iron. One subject had stopped moving entirely, sitting rigid in the corner, eyes wide open, refusing food or water. His lips moved constantly, but no sound came out. Another paced in jagged circles, muttering under his breath, scratching bloody symbols into his own arms. But it was Subject 6, the quiet one, who unsettled them most. He hadn't spoken in days, but whenever anyone looked at him through the observation window, he was already staring back. Not just looking, watching, unblinking, as if he knew who was on the other side of the glass. One intern swore he saw Subject 6 mouth his name, but he'd never given it. The first break. It was the technician, Dwyer, who cracked first. On the morning of day 12, after another night of endless screams from the test chamber, he slammed his headset onto the control desk and shouted, "This isn't science anymore, this is torture!" His outburst silenced the room. General Abrams narrowed his eyes. "You're relieved. Go home. Now." But Dwyer didn't leave. His face was pale, twitching, his voice trembling. "Don't you get it? They're not just losing their minds. Something else is waking up inside them. We've opened the door, and it doesn't want to be closed." Before anyone could stop him, Dwyer stormed toward the test chamber. The door slammed shut behind him. What they saw. The monitors lit up with chaos. The subjects rushed him instantly, like predators recognizing fresh prey. But they didn't attack him. Instead, they circled him, muttering incoherently, their voices overlapping in some grotesque chant. Dwyer's microphone picked up every word. "Not alone, not alone, not alone, not alone." Over and over, in perfect unison. Dr. Holloway screamed through the intercom, "Dwyer, get out of there, now!" But Dwyer wasn't moving. He stood perfectly still, tears streaming down his face, whispering, "I can hear them. Oh my God, I can hear them." The lights inside the chamber flickered. For a moment, all 6 subjects and Dwyer turned their heads in the exact same motion, their eyes locking onto the observation window. Everyone watching felt the same thing, an invisible hand pressing down on their chest, choking the air out of them. And then the feed went black. The silence. When the screens came back online 30 seconds later, Dwyer was gone. Not dead, not torn apart, not even a drop of blood. Just gone. All 6 subjects were seated neatly in a row against the far wall, staring blankly at the camera, their lips curled into identical smiles. Dr. Holloway whispered, "They've finally synchronized." No one dared respond. The experiment had entered a stage no one could control. What if the thing keeping them awake isn't human at all? The storm outside had grown louder, slamming sheets of rain against the walls of the abandoned hospital. The emergency lights flickered, their dying glow painting the hallway in brief flashes of red. Dr. Adler led the way, clutching his flashlight tightly, as Sarah and Ethan followed. Somewhere ahead, beyond the shattered doors of the containment wing, a low groaning echoed, neither fully human nor completely monstrous. Sarah whispered, "Are we sure we even want to find them?" Dr. Adler didn't answer. His breathing was ragged, and sweat dripped down his forehead despite the freezing air. He looked like a man possessed, his eyes wild with determination. The recordings. They finally reached the sealed chamber. The reinforced glass wall had long since cracked, but a steel door, twisted and dented, barely held in place. On the wall nearby, a control panel flickered to life. Sarah brushed the dust away and realized it was a recording interface. Multiple files blinked on screen. Log 21, day 1. Log 45, day 7. Log 78, day 14. Final log, unknown. Ethan hesitated. Do we play one? Against her better judgment, Sarah tapped the first file. The speakers crackled. A man's voice, cheerful and confident, filled the hallway. Welcome to Project Eterna. Today marks the first day of our test subjects remaining awake. If this succeeds, we will redefine human limits. Static. The next log began automatically. The voice was shaky now. Day 7. Subjects show severe paranoia. They speak of shadows on the ceiling. They claim someone whispers their names when no one else is in the room. Still, they remain awake. Ethan shivered. Whispers? Log 14 played. Screams. Desperate. Inhuman. The sound of nails against metal. The researcher's voice was almost drowned out. Day 14. The subjects are changing. They haven't slept in 2 weeks. Their eyes bleed when exposed to light. Their teeth, God, their teeth, look sharper. They don't just resist sleep, they resist us. Then silence. Finally, the last file. At first, nothing. Just heavy breathing. Then, slowly, a whispering chorus emerged. Dozens of voices layered on top of one another, chanting the same word. Awake. 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 Sarah yanked her hand away from the console as the sound grew louder, almost shaking the walls. The steel door rattled violently, as if something on the other side heard the voices too. The door breaks. Turn it off! Ethan screamed, but the system refused. The speakers blared with maddening intensity. The steel door groaned under pressure. With a deafening screech, the metal bent outward. A pale, bony hand forced its way through the crack. Dr. Adler's face lit up, not with fear, but wonder. It worked, he whispered. It really worked. Sarah grabbed his arm. What the hell is wrong with you? That thing isn't human anymore. But Adler yanked himself free, stepping closer to the door as more hands pushed through, clawing at the air. Their skin was shredded, their fingernails blackened, but their grip was terrifyingly strong. And then, through the widening gap, eyes appeared. Dozens of them. Bloodshot. Staring in every direction at once. The survivors. The door finally tore off its hinges. A figure emerged, tall, skeletal, its body trembling with unnatural energy. Its jaw stretched wider than humanly possible, teeth jagged and broken, yet strong enough to snap through bone. But the worst part was the sound. The voices. The creature spoke in unison with the others trapped behind it. You cannot sleep. Neither can we. We are forever awake. Sarah froze. Ethan dragged her backward, heart pounding, as Adler stepped toward the creature, hands shaking but smiling like a madman. They've ascended, he murmured. Do you see it? They've shed sleep like a useless skin. They've become more than human. The creature's clawed hand pierced through his chest before he could finish. Blood sprayed the walls as Adler collapsed, still smiling. Sarah screamed. Ethan pulled her into a side corridor just as the creatures began to pour out of the chamber, crawling, limping, and twitching, all whispering that same word, awake, awake, awake. The pursuit. They ran. The hallways echoed with the sound of claws scraping tiles and the whispering chant that never seemed to fade. No matter how far they ran, the voices always sounded right behind them. Sarah stumbled. Ethan yanked her up, adrenaline surging. We need an exit, he shouted. There isn't one, she cried. The storm took out the main doors. They turned a corner and froze. The walls ahead were covered in writing, jagged scratches carved deep into the plaster. The same word repeated over and over, hundreds of times. Awake. Sarah's flashlight flickered. For the briefest moment, she saw movement among the words, as if the shadows themselves were writhing. The whispers grew louder. Then, silence. The air turned freezing cold. Their breath clouded before them, and in that suffocating stillness, a voice spoke directly into their ears. Not from behind them, not from the walls, but from inside their heads. "Why do you run? You've already joined us." Sarah screamed, clutching her skull. Ethan staggered back, eyes wide. "What do they mean?" he gasped. Her flashlight died, and in the darkness, countless eyes opened all around them. The experiment is no longer confined to the chamber. The creatures, or whatever they've become, are everywhere. And Sarah and Ethan may already be more involved in the experiment than they realize. What if the real experiment was never about sleep at all? The room fell into an unnatural silence. Dr. Hayes' words echoed in the sterile air, louder than any scream could have been. Ethan's hands trembled as he pressed his back against the cold steel wall, his heart pounding like a trapped animal's. What do you mean?" he whispered, though part of him already feared the answer. Dr. Hayes removed his glasses slowly, almost ceremoniously, as if peeling away a mask. His eyes gleamed with a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. "The truth is, Ethan, the sleep deprivation, the chemicals, the wires, they were just distractions. This experiment was never about testing how long the human body can survive without rest." "Then what was it about?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. Hayes leaned closer, his shadow stretching unnaturally across the dim light. "It was about what comes through when the mind is kept open too long." Ethan shook his head violently. No, you're lying. You're trying to mess with me." Hayes cut him off, his voice sharp, commanding. "Think, Ethan. Think back to the voices, the whispers you heard in the dark. Do you truly believe those were hallucinations? Did you ever stop to wonder why everyone heard the same phrases, the same words, even though you were separated, isolated, and sedated differently?" Ethan's blood ran cold. His mind clawed for rational explanations, but they crumbled like ash. He remembered the whispers, unfamiliar yet intimate, speaking names he had never told anyone. He remembered the words that crawled under his skin. "We are awake." Hayes' lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "We didn't unlock madness, Ethan. We unlocked a doorway." The lights flickered violently, buzzing as though the entire facility trembled with a pulse not its own. From the observation room beyond the glass, Ethan saw movement. Shadows, writhing, pressing against the walls like drowning figures reaching from beneath black water. "They're still here, aren't they?" Ethan whispered. Hayes nodded solemnly. "Yes, we pulled them through. Not fully, but enough." He lowered his voice, almost reverent. "The human brain is a gate. Sleep keeps it closed. Deny sleep long enough, and the gate stays open. Something slips in." Ethan staggered backward, bile rising in his throat. You made us bait." A bitter laugh escaped Hayes. "We made you pioneers. Without you, none of this could have been proven." Ethan slammed his fists against the glass between them. "Proven? People died. They weren't people anymore by the end." Hayes didn't flinch. His eyes were feverish, obsessed. "And yet, they showed us what lies beyond. Do you understand the importance of that? We've touched the edge of another reality, Ethan. We've brushed against something greater than life itself." A deep, guttural groan reverberated through the walls, vibrating the glass so hard Ethan thought it might shatter. The shadows behind Hayes writhed faster, shapes peeling away from the darkness, like silhouettes breaking free. They had no faces, no forms, only outlines of hunger. Ethan's chest tightened. His instincts screamed at him to run, but the door behind him was locked tight. His only path led closer to Hayes and the horrors stirring beyond the glass. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice barely audible. Hayes tilted his head, almost childlike. Now they come through fully. The experiment is complete." The glass cracked. A single jagged line split across the observation window. Ethan's stomach dropped. Hayes didn't move. He was still smiling, eyes glowing in the dim. "Don't you see, Ethan? You're the last one, the final subject. It's all been leading to this moment." Another crack split the glass, then another, like a spiderweb spreading across its surface. The shadows pressed harder, their whispers growing into a deafening chorus. "Let us in. Let us in. Let us in." Hayes raised his arms as if welcoming gods. "Open your mind, Ethan. Open the gate." Ethan screamed, shaking his head. "No, I won't, But then, he realized something terrifying. The whispers weren't only in the room. They were inside his head. The lights burst, plunging everything into darkness. The last thing Ethan saw was Hayes, his face split with euphoria as black shapes flooded through the shattered glass. And in the dark, Ethan felt it, something ancient, something endless, slipping into him, taking root where his exhaustion had left cracks. The sleep experiment was never about what they could endure. It was about what would survive inside them. What if the experiment was never about sleep, but about something far worse? The cameras flickered one last time before plunging the room into near-total darkness. Only the faint, throbbing glow of the red emergency lights remained, painting the walls in a hellish hue. Dr. Hale's chest heaved as he stared at the figure that used to be Evelyn. Her lips twisted into something inhuman, neither smile nor snarl, but a grotesque mimicry of both. Her skin stretched unnaturally tight against her face, veins bulging beneath like rivers of black ink. "Why are you still awake?" Dr. Hale croaked, gripping the scalpel tighter. His hand trembled, though he knew it was useless against whatever stood before him. Evelyn tilted her head, the motion sharp, bird-like. "We never needed sleep," she said softly. Her voice was layered now, two tones overlapping, one human, one impossibly deep. "You needed us to. That was the lie." The words struck him harder than any blade could. From the corner, Grant's broken body shifted. His jaw hung loose, but his voice, raspy, filled with agony, joined hers. "Do you know what dreams really are, Doctor? They're the barrier, the chains. Sleep keeps us locked away. You took that from us." Dr. Hale stumbled backward, his mind spiraling. The experiment. It wasn't creating monsters. It was unleashing them. The monitors roared back to life, static swirling across the screens before forming grotesque images, flashes of distorted faces, shadows writhing, screaming mouths stretching wider than humanly possible. Every subject in the other rooms appeared briefly on the screens, but their eyes, God, their eyes were not their own. "You didn't open their minds," Evelyn whispered, stepping closer. "You opened the door." The overhead speakers crackled again with the director's voice, trembling now, devoid of the usual clinical calm. "Shut it down. Shut it down now." But it was too late. The walls themselves began to pulse, faintly breathing, as though the building had become alive. Every emergency siren wailed at once, drowning out the chaos. One of the security doors buckled inward, not from explosives or human force, but from something unseen pressing against it, clawing its way into reality. Dr. Hale felt his sanity cracking. His entire career, his obsession with answers, had led him here. And now, the answer was staring back at him. Sleep wasn't weakness. Sleep wasn't mystery. Sleep was protection. The subjects advanced. Evelyn's eyes shimmered black, twin abysses. "Come with us, Doctor," she hissed. "See what waits on the other side." He raised the scalpel to his own throat, the only escape left. "I won't go with you," he whispered. But before the blade could pierce skin, the lights exploded overhead. Shards of glass rained down. The power surged once more, and then everything went silent. When the emergency response teams finally entered Facility 9 the next morning, they found blood, shattered equipment, and torn walls, but no bodies, not a single subject, not a single scientist. The experiment logs were corrupted, screens burned out, but one audio fragment was recovered. The distorted voice of Evelyn, or what had once been Evelyn. We do not sleep because we no longer need to. You, on the other hand, should never close your eyes again. Final twist ending. The government classified the project as a catastrophic failure, burying it deep under layers of secrecy. Official reports claimed a containment breach, fire, and total loss of personnel. But weeks later, strange reports began trickling in. Families complaining of loved ones suddenly refusing to sleep, yet showing no fatigue. Towns whispering of people standing in the streets at night, eyes black as voids, swaying silently. And Dr. Hale? He was never recovered. But sometimes in late-night radio static, listeners claimed to hear his voice, begging, pleading, screaming the same words over and over. Don't let them take your sleep. Don't let them in. Would you move into a home that wasn't supposed to exist? That's the question Claire kept asking herself the night they pulled up the long gravel driveway, headlights sweeping over the weathered white siding and tall, sloping roof of the house. It sat in the middle of nowhere, fields stretching out into shadow, woods beyond that. But the strangest part wasn't the silence, or even the way the windows seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. The strangest part was that this house wasn't on the map. Claire's husband, Mark, had been the one to find it. A friend of a friend mentioned a hidden gem of a property, priced far lower than it should have been. The realtor swore it was just a listing error, a rural foreclosure with no official records to trace back the previous owners. Mark had grinned like a kid on Christmas morning when they signed the papers. But Claire couldn't shake the unease. From the moment she stepped out of the car, her stomach twisted. The air was damp and heavy, carrying the smell of wet soil and something faintly metallic. The house loomed against the night sky, its windows blank and watchful. It wasn't falling apart, not exactly, but it didn't look like it had been lived in for years. The wood of the porch creaked beneath her shoes as if groaning under the weight of her presence. "Babe," Mark called, lugging a box from the car. "We finally did it. No more city rent, no more noisy neighbors. Just us and peace and quiet." Claire tried to smile, but it felt forced. Yeah, just us. Inside, the house was bigger than she expected. Too big. The ceilings stretched high, beams cutting across the dimly lit rooms, and the floor plan seemed to twist in ways she couldn't quite follow. She counted 5 rooms on the first floor alone, and 3 more upstairs. Her brow furrowed. "Didn't the listing say it was a 2-bedroom?" she asked. Mark shrugged, already unpacking. "Probably a typo. Score for us, right?" That night, after hours of setting up, they collapsed into bed in one of the upstairs rooms. Claire tried to sleep, but the house had other ideas. She heard faint creaks, like footsteps pacing the hallway, a low thud somewhere downstairs, and, though she told herself it was her imagination, the sound of wood splintering, as though something were being built. At exactly 3:12 a.m., she woke to a draft. The air was freezing, raising goosebumps across her arms. She sat up and blinked into the darkness. Across the room, where there had only been a wall when they moved in, now stood a door. A door that hadn't been there before. Claire's breath caught. "Mark," she whispered, nudging him. He stirred, groaned, then sat up groggily. "What is it?" She pointed, but she didn't need to say anything. His eyes widened when he saw it too. They both climbed out of bed slowly, the old wooden floorboards creaking under their weight. The new door was painted the same dull white as the others in the house, the handle old-fashioned brass. It looked like it had always been there. Mark reached for it. "Don't!" Claire hissed, grabbing his arm, but he shook her off. "It's just a closet or something." The door swung open with a drawn-out creak. The smell hit them first, iron, rot, something damp and foul. Claire gagged, covering her nose. Mark lifted his phone to shine the flashlight inside. The beam revealed a small, square room. At first glance, it was just empty space. Wooden walls, a bare floor. But then the light fell on the far corner. Dark stains soaked deep into the boards. Handprints smeared against the wall. and etched into the plaster, jagged and uneven, was a single word scratched over and over again until the wall seemed to bleed with it. Murder. The light flickered. For a split second, Claire swore she saw something crouched in the corner, its eyes gleaming back at her. But then it was gone, leaving only the empty, ruined space. Mark shut the door quickly, his face pale. It's probably some sick joke. Maybe kids broke in before. But his voice trembled, betraying the fear beneath his attempt at logic. They went back to bed, but neither of them slept. The next morning, when Claire dared to look again, the door was gone. The wall was solid, as though nothing had ever been there. And yet, she couldn't forget the stains, the smell, or the word carved into the walls. She didn't know it yet, but that was only the beginning. Because the house hadn't finished building. It was only just getting started. The following day was gray and heavy, clouds sagging low enough to touch the roof of the house. Claire moved through the rooms with a knot in her stomach, every step echoing in the too large silence. She kept checking the wall where the strange door had been. Solid plaster. No seam, no knob, not even a shadow of a frame. If not for the memory of the smell and the stains, she might have believed it had all been a nightmare. But Mark was quieter than usual. He brewed coffee, flipped through his phone, and avoided her eyes. Every time she tried to bring up what they had seen, he waved it off. "Old houses are weird," he muttered. "Walls shift, doors stick. We were exhausted. We probably imagined it." Yet when the sun dipped behind the trees and night fell, Claire noticed how often he glanced down the hallway as if expecting something to move. By midnight, a storm had rolled in. Rain lashed the windows, and the wind groaned through the trees. Claire lay awake in the upstairs bedroom, staring at the ceiling while Mark's steady breathing told her he had finally managed to sleep. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening. Something she couldn't hear but could sense. A low hum beneath the storm, like nails dragging across wood. When her eyes flicked to the digital clock, it read 3:09 a.m. Her chest tightened. She sat up, every muscle tense. She wanted to close her eyes, to block it out, but her body moved on its own. Slowly, she climbed out of bed, her bare feet cold against the floorboards, and walked into the hall. There it was, another door. This one hadn't been there yesterday. It sat at the end of the upstairs hall, half hidden in shadow, its frame rough as if it had been forced into the wall overnight. Unlike the first, the paint was peeling, blackened in places like it had been burned. Claire's breath came shallow. She should have gone back to bed. She should have woken Mark. But the pull of it was unbearable, like the house itself was willing her closer. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. The brass was icy cold, colder than metal should ever be. She turned it slowly, and the door creaked open with a sound that was more like a groan. The smell hit her again, thick, suffocating, metallic. She gagged, covering her mouth with her sleeve. Inside was a bedroom, old-fashioned, with faded wallpaper and a crooked bed against the wall. The covers were rumpled as if someone had just left. A broken lamp lay on the floor, the bulb shattered. And on the far side of the room, dark stains splattered the floorboards and climbed the wall like ivy. Claire's stomach dropped. She knew those stains. She knew that smell. Blood. Her hands shook as she lifted her phone and opened the flashlight app. She swept the beam across the walls and froze. On the wallpaper, written in dripping letters the color of rust, were the words, "The boy who died here still screams." Her breath came ragged, too loud in the silence. Then beneath the storm, she heard it. A sound so faint she thought it might be the wind. But no, there it was again, high-pitched, desperate. A child's scream. Claire stumbled backward, the beam of her phone jerking wildly. In the corner, she swore she saw the outline of something small curled up on the floor. A boy, pale, thin, his mouth open wide, screaming silently. She slammed the door shut and nearly fell against the wall. Her chest burned, tears stinging her eyes. Mark's voice came from behind her, thick with sleep. "Claire, what the hell are you doing?" She spun, still shaking. "The room! It's another one! There's blood! There's a boy!" But when she turned to point, the hallway was empty. No door, no scorch marks, no smell, just smooth, solid wall. Mark rubbed his face, scowling. "You've got to stop this, you're scaring me." "I'm not imagining it," she snapped, her voice breaking. "I saw him, Mark. A boy. He was screaming." Mark's expression softened, but only slightly. He pulled her into his arms, murmuring, "It's stress. Moving, the storm, lack of sleep. You need to rest." But Claire didn't sleep. She sat awake, shaking while the storm raged outside. The next morning, she did something she hadn't done since they moved in. She drove into town. The library smelled of dust and old paper, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Claire asked the clerk for old newspapers, records of crimes, anything unusual from the past few decades. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe nothing. Maybe proof she was losing her mind. But she found it. A headline from 20 years ago. "Local boy 8, found dead in bedroom. Police ruled death a homicide." Her blood ran cold as she read the details. The crime scene photos showed a small, faded bedroom, wallpaper peeling, a broken lamp, stains across the wall. It was the same room she had seen last night, word for word. When she drove back to the house, gravel crunching under her tires, a terrible thought rooted itself in her mind. The rooms weren't random. The house was building murder scenes, and it had only just begun. The silence in the house became heavier than words could ever explain. That morning, neither Emily nor Mark mentioned the new door that had appeared in the hallway overnight. They didn't need to. Both of them had seen it. Both of them had chosen to walk around it, as if ignoring it would somehow make it vanish. But deep inside, a gnawing truth began to settle in. The house was no longer just strange. It was alive. And it was thinking. Emily tried to distract herself by making breakfast. The egg sizzled in the pan, the smell of butter filling the kitchen. Mark sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, but his eyes weren't really on the screen. He was staring past it, into nothing. Every few minutes, his gaze flickered toward the hallway, toward the door that hadn't been there yesterday. Neither of them mentioned it, but both were aware of its silent presence. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I don't want to open it." Mark looked up, startled by her words. "What?" "The door," she said quietly, lowering her voice as though the house itself might be listening. "We shouldn't open it." Mark set his phone down and leaned forward. "We can't just leave it there. What if it's, I don't know, dangerous?" Emily gave a hollow laugh. "Mark, everything about this place is dangerous. We moved into a house that wasn't on any map. Rooms keep showing up out of nowhere. This isn't normal." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, Mark didn't try to reassure her. He just nodded, his jaw tightening. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes as the clock ticked closer to 3 a.m., the time when the house seemed most alive. At 2:59, she rolled over and found Mark already awake, sitting upright in bed. His eyes were locked on the hallway. The clock struck 3. A faint sound echoed through the house like wood shifting, beams groaning and nails scratching against each other. The air grew heavier, almost suffocating. At 3:03, the sound stopped. Mark stood, as though pulled by an unseen thread, and walked toward the hallway. "Mark, don't," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. But he didn't answer. His steps were slow, deliberate, like someone moving through water. Emily followed, her fear fighting against the stronger instinct to not let him face it alone. The new door loomed at the end of the hallway. It was different from the others, where the first had looked old and weathered, and the second had been plain wood. This one was painted deep red, almost the color of dried blood. Its handle gleamed as if polished. It looked too new, too intentional. Mark placed his hand on the knob. "Stop," Emily hissed, grabbing his arm. "You don't have to—" But before she could finish, the knob turned on its own. The door swung open slowly, creaking as though it had been waiting. Inside was a small room, no larger than a closet. But the sight within made Emily's stomach twist. The walls were covered with photographs, pinned haphazardly in overlapping rows. Every photo showed people from town, smiling at the grocery store, walking their dogs, attending church. Some she recognized from the news reports about old murders. Others looked like random strangers. And then, her breath caught in her throat. In the center of the wall were two photographs pinned side by side, one of Emily, one of Mark. Both pictures were recent, too recent. They hadn't even been taken in this house. These were photos from their apartment, from before they moved here. Mark reached forward, his fingers trembling as he touched his own photo. How is this possible? Emily felt the walls closing in, her chest tightening with a panic she couldn't contain. "Mark, we need to leave. Now. Tonight." He nodded quickly, too quickly, like a man grasping at the one lifeline thrown his way. "Yes. We'll pack what we can and go." But just as they turned to leave the room, a new sound filled the house. Not the groaning of wood, not the scratching of nails. This was different. It was laughter, low, distorted, echoing through the walls like the house itself was mocking them. Emily froze, her skin crawling. The sound didn't come from any direction. It came from everywhere at once. Mark grabbed her hand. "We're getting out, now!" They ran to the bedroom, shoving clothes into bags, grabbing their phones, keys, wallets. Every second, the laughter grew louder, shaking the walls, rattling the floorboards beneath their feet. By the time they reached the front door, Emily was nearly sobbing with fear. She fumbled with the locks, her hands slick with sweat. Mark yanked the door open and froze. Outside, there was no yard, no road, no trees. There was only darkness, endless, suffocating black. The house had erased the outside world. Emily's scream was swallowed by the void as the front door slammed shut on its own, rattling the walls like a coffin lid being sealed. They were trapped. And somewhere deep within the house, another door was already beginning to form. Emily's scream still echoed in her chest long after the front door slammed shut, but the sound of the laughter, deep, guttural, vibrating through the walls, lingered in the air like smoke. She stumbled backward, her back pressing against the wall, and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, her chest heaving. Mark stood frozen in front of the door, his hand still gripping the knob, staring at the black void outside as if maybe, if he looked long enough, something would change. But the darkness remained, thick, endless, alive. "This isn't real," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "This can't be real." Mark let go of the knob and staggered back, his face pale. There's nothing out there, Em. Nothing. It's like the world doesn't exist anymore." Emily's eyes darted around the foyer, her thoughts spinning. No, it does exist. It has to. We drove here. We saw the town. She stopped, her words choking off as a sickening thought pushed into her mind. What if we didn't? What if we never actually got here? The silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating, until Mark finally spoke. "We can't just sit here. We need to figure out what this place wants. Why us?" His words made Emily flinch. "Don't say that," she whispered. "Don't make it sound like the house is aware." But even as she said it, she knew it was true. The house was more than aware. It was hungry. They retreated to the living room, sitting opposite each other as the old grandfather clock ticked away the minutes. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of the house settling, the faint rush of blood in Emily's ears, the clock's pendulum swinging side to side. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the house let out a sound like bones snapping in unison, and the air thickened. Another door had appeared, this time in the living room. Emily's eyes locked onto it instantly. It hadn't been there when they sat down. The door was taller than the others, stretching nearly to the ceiling, with iron hinges and a heavy wooden surface carved with jagged symbols. They weren't letters, not from any language Emily recognized, but they radiated with something raw, primal. Mark stood, his fists clenching. "I'm not letting it control us anymore," he said through gritted teeth. "Mark, no!" But he was already moving. His fear had twisted into anger, the kind of anger that came when the human mind couldn't process any more terror. He stormed across the room, grabbed the doorknob, and yanked the door open. The room beyond was larger than any of the others. It looked like a cellar with stone walls slick with moisture and a dirt floor. The air that wafted out was cold, damp, and foul, like rot buried deep underground. Emily hesitated at the threshold, but Mark stepped inside, holding his phone up as a flashlight. That's when Emily saw it. The floor wasn't dirt, it was ash, layers and layers of it, stretching across the room. Her stomach churned as she realized what she was looking at. Not ash, bone dust. The beam of Mark's phone moved across the walls, revealing strange carvings etched into the stone, symbols matching the ones on the door. Between the symbols were names, dozens of them, hundreds. Emily's blood ran cold as she spotted a familiar name, David Caro, the man who had been murdered in town 30 years ago, the crime scene they had already seen recreated in one of the earlier rooms. Her eyes moved further down the wall. Rebecca Harlow, 1989, another murder victim. Name after name, date after date. The history of every killing in the town, etched into the walls like a ledger of suffering. Mark stopped suddenly, his flashlight beam trembling. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She moved closer, her eyes following the light, and then she saw it. Their names, Mark Hollis, Emily Carter, no date, not yet. Emily's knees gave out and she fell to the ground, her hands digging into the ash as she tried to breathe. The house hadn't just shown them the past, it was recording the future. Their future. Mark stumbled back, dropping his phone, the light spinning across the walls until it landed on the far corner of the room. Emily's gaze followed the beam, and she saw something move. A figure. It was standing half in shadow, its body hunched, its face obscured. The faint outline looked human, but its arms were too long, its posture too wrong. The thing tilted its head slowly, the motion sharp, deliberate, curious, like an animal watching prey. Emily scrambled back toward the door, her throat too tight to scream. Mark rushed after her, slamming the door shut once they were through. The laughter returned immediately. This time it was louder, clearer, and worst of all, it wasn't just the house. It was coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Like the entire structure was filled with unseen voices, mocking them, rejoicing in their terror. Emily clutched her chest, trying to breathe. "It's not just building rooms," she whispered, her words shaking. "It's building us. It's writing us into its story." Mark's face twisted with realization. The house isn't showing us what happened here. It's making it happen again. They stared at each other, the truth sinking in like poison. Every door was another chapter. Every room was another crime. And the house wasn't finished with them yet. As the clock struck 4 a.m., the walls shuddered, and from deep within the structure came the unmistakable sound of hammering. Nails being driven into wood. The house wasn't done building. It was only just beginning. The hammering never stopped. It echoed through the walls, slow and methodical, like the heartbeat of something alive. With each strike, the air in the house grew heavier, pressing down on Emily and Mark until it felt like the atmosphere itself was suffocating them. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The wooden beams groaned as if the entire house was shifting, reshaping, preparing. Emily clutched Mark's arm, her voice trembling. "It's building something. For us." Mark's jaw was set tight, but his eyes betrayed the fear eating at him. "Then we stop it. We don't wait. We fight back." But how do you fight a house? The hammering ceased. Silence fell so suddenly it made Emily's ears ring. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them lurched. The ground seemed to tilt, forcing them both to stumble. From the far wall of the living room, wood began to splinter, tearing itself apart as a new doorway forced itself into existence. This one was unlike the others. It wasn't a door, it was a gaping archway. Blackness bled through the opening like ink, swallowing the room's dim light. And inside that darkness, something shifted. A faint glow appeared, just enough to show what lay beyond. It was a room. Their room. Emily's heart stopped. She recognized it instantly. It was their apartment bedroom, every detail recreated perfectly. The gray comforter, the chipped nightstand, even the framed photo of them from 2 summers ago smiling at the beach. Mark's voice cracked. That's ours. Emily shook her head, tears filling her eyes. No, that's not ours. It's what the house wants. It's taking pieces of us, memories of us, and building something we can't escape. But then her gaze drifted to the bed. 2 shapes lay on it, still, motionless. She moved closer without realizing it, her body trembling with every step. As the light shifted, she saw them clearly. It was her, and Mark. Their bodies were pale, lifeless, their eyes wide open and glassy, staring into nothing. The smell of decay wafted from the room, sour and heavy, and Emily gagged. Her scream tore through the silence. She stumbled back, colliding with Mark, who was frozen in place, his face drained of color. The house wasn't just building their future, it was building their death. The laughter returned, louder, clearer than ever before. This time, Emily swore she could hear words hidden in it, fragmented whispers that seemed to seep straight into her mind. You belong here. You were always meant to. Mark grabbed her hand, yanking her away from the archway. We're not staying here. Do you hear me? We're not dying here. They ran, through the hallway, past the photos, past the red door. But the house shifted around them. Doors slammed shut, walls stretched longer. Every turn brought them back to the same place, the archway to the replica of their apartment. The house was funneling them, forcing them. Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing. It's useless, it's already decided. Mark crouched beside her, gripping her shoulders. No, listen to me. The house feeds on fear. That's what all of this is, scaring us into giving up. If we stop playing its game, maybe, just maybe, we can take control. Emily stared at him, her breath ragged. Could it be that simple? Could defiance break the cycle? The archway pulsed, the darkness inside throbbing like a heartbeat. Their decaying doubles still lay on the bed, waiting. Mark stood, pulling Emily up with him. He took a deep breath, turned toward the room, and screamed into the void. You don't own us! The house trembled violently, the floorboards buckling beneath their feet. The laughter twisted into a guttural roar, a sound of fury. The air turned icy, slicing through their skin like blades. Emily found her voice, joining him. We're not yours! We're not staying! The walls cracked, plaster splitting like open wounds. Light, blinding, searing light, poured through the fractures, spilling across the floor. The house howled in protest, every board shrieking as if it were alive and dying. Mark tightened his grip on Emily's hand. Run! They bolted toward the light. The floor gave way beneath them, the walls collapsing inward. The sound was deafening, like the end of the world. Emily's vision blurred as the light swallowed her whole. And then, silence. Emily opened her eyes slowly. She was lying on the grass, real grass. Above her stretched a dawn sky streaked with pink and gold. Birds chirped in the distance. The air smelled of dew and pine, not rot and ash. Mark was beside her, breathing hard, alive. They both turned. The house was gone. Only an empty field remained. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Emily whispered, Did we escape? Mark's eyes stayed fixed on the empty field. I think so, But as they stood and began walking toward the distant road, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her hand brushed her pocket, and she froze. Inside was a folded photograph. She pulled it out slowly, her heart thudding. It was a picture of her and Mark, taken in this exact moment, standing in the field. The caption scrawled across the bottom in jagged letters read, "The last time they thought they were free." Emily's breath hitched, the paper trembling in her hands. She turned to Mark, her voice breaking. "It's not over." From somewhere deep beneath the earth, faint but undeniable, came the sound of hammering. The house was still building, and it was bringing them back.
Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never thought I would be the kind of person to post something like this online, but after all these years, the memory still clings to me like wet clothes in the dead of night. I used to laugh at people who swore they'd seen ghosts in cemeteries. I thought it was all superstition, campfire stories, or bored teenagers exaggerating their midnight dares. But that was before the graveyard job. That was before the thing I saw, the thing I still dream about, changed me forever. Back in 2012, I was 23, broke and desperate for money. I had just dropped out of community college and was crashing at my cousin's place in a small town in Ohio. The only work I could find was through this old man named Harvey, who ran a private cemetery on the outskirts of town. He said he needed someone to watch the grounds at night. I didn't ask too many questions. $11 an hour to sit in a shack and make sure nobody vandalized graves or stole flowers sounded fine by me. The place was called St. Augustine's Cemetery, though no church stood near it anymore. The land stretched for acres, full of cracked tombstones, crooked iron fences, and massive oak trees that bent in odd shapes like they were bowing over the dead. The first night felt uneventful. I sat in the guard shack with a thermos of coffee and my phone, checking the grounds every hour with a flashlight. It was quiet in that eerie way, like the silence had weight to it. Even the crickets seemed hesitant to chirp. By 3 a.m., I was nodding off when I heard something crunch outside the shack window. Leaves, twigs, like footsteps. I grabbed the flashlight and looked, expecting raccoons. But no one was there, just rows of pale stones disappearing into fog. That was the first time I heard it. A voice, low, distant, but clear. It sounded like a woman softly crying somewhere among the graves. My stomach dropped. My logical brain said it had to be the wind carrying noises from the road. Still, I walked out, heart hammering, light cutting across the mist. I followed the sound, weaving through the graves until I reached an old family mausoleum near the far edge of the property. The crying stopped. I shined the beam at the door, rusted shut, sealed with a heavy lock that hadn't been touched in decades. That night I didn't sleep. The second night, Harvey told me, "Don't wander too far out there. Just sit in the shack. You'll be fine." He said it like he knew something I didn't, but the voice came again. Around 2:45 a.m., faint, like a lullaby carried on the wind. This time, it whispered my name. Daniel. I froze. Nobody should have known my name. I backed into the shack and locked the door, trembling like a child. I tried calling my cousin, but of course he didn't pick up. I sat there shaking until dawn broke and Harvey came around to check in. When I told him what happened, he just frowned and said, "Don't answer if you hear it again. Ever." By the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. The crying, the voice, the feeling of eyes watching me. It was eating at me. I grabbed the spare keys from Harvey's desk. He left them in the shack for emergencies, and decided I was going to check that mausoleum. Around 3 a.m., the voice returned, louder than ever. "Daniel, help me." My hands shook as I walked across the foggy field. My flashlight flickered. The iron gate groaned as I pushed through. When I reached the mausoleum, I tried the key. To my surprise, the lock opened with a sharp click, like it had been waiting for me. The door creaked, releasing a burst of air that smelled like rot and damp earth. I stepped inside. There were coffins stacked in the walls, names carved into marble. Dust everywhere. But in the center of the floor was something that didn't belong, a wooden box, old but not as old as the rest. It looked like it had been shoved there recently. My beam caught scratches along the lid, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. I felt dizzy, like the air was spinning. The next thing I remember is running, sprinting across the field, dropping my flashlight, tripping over stones. I didn't stop until I burst into the shack, slammed the door, and hid in the corner until daylight. I told Harvey I quit. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly like he'd expected it. But here's the part that still haunts me. 2 weeks later, I read in the local paper about a group of teenagers who broke into St. Augustine's one night. They were found near the old mausoleum. All 4 of them dead. Their bodies weren't just dead. They were described as mummified, as if decades had passed. And in the grainy photo in the newspaper, I saw the mausoleum door wide open. The wooden box I had seen inside? Gone. The worst part is sometimes, late at night when I'm drifting to sleep, I hear that same soft voice whispering my name again. Daniel. And every time I swear I feel cold fingers brushing against my skin. I never went back to St. Augustine's. But the thing I let out that night, I don't think it ever left me. I used to work for a funeral home when I was in my late 20s. It wasn't the kind of job most people dream of, but it paid my bills, and I'd grown oddly comfortable around death. You learn to compartmentalize. It's just another part of life, right? That's what I thought until one particular night, a night that still crawls into my dreams like worms through dirt. The funeral home I worked for partnered with several cemeteries, meaning sometimes I had to help out with late burials or, in rare cases, relocations of old graves. It sounds unsettling, but you'd be surprised how routine it becomes. Back in 2016, I got a call from my boss, Mr. Hampton. He was an old, humorless man, the kind who carried the weight of every funeral on his shoulders. He said he needed me at Cedar Hill Cemetery after midnight. Family business, he muttered over the phone. Don't ask questions, just show up. So I did. Cedar Hill was one of those sprawling ancient graveyards that felt like stepping into another world. The headstones were weathered, angels missing wings, and mausoleums half swallowed by ivy. The air always smelled of moss and iron. When I got there, Mr. Hampton was already waiting by a single floodlight. Next to him stood 2 men I'd never seen before, both tall, dressed in black coats despite the summer heat. They didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge me. Hampton handed me a shovel and pointed toward a grave that had already been partially dug. The headstone read, Eleanor Price, 1892-1914. She has to be moved, Hampton said. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. I wanted to ask why. Usually there were permits, paperwork, reasons, but something in the way those men stared at me kept my mouth shut. So I dug. The dirt was heavy, thick with roots. Each shovelful felt harder than the last, though I couldn't tell if it was exhaustion or the way the silence pressed against me. Not even crickets dared to sing. After what felt like an eternity, my shovel hit something solid. The coffin. It was small, too small for comfort. Eleanor had been barely 20 when she died, but the size made me wonder if she had been even younger. Carefully, we lifted the decayed wood from the ground. The men in coats didn't help. They only watched, their eyes glinting strangely in the floodlight. When we set the coffin down, Hampton pulled out a crowbar. I thought he was going to move it intact to another site. But no. He pried the lid open. The smell that hit us was indescribable. It was the stench of damp soil and something older, fouler. I turned away, gagging, but curiosity pulled my eyes back. Inside wasn't what I expected. There wasn't a body. Instead, the coffin was lined with strange symbols carved into the wood. Symbols I didn't recognize, but they looked deliberate. Circles, spirals, intersecting lines. At the center was a bundle wrapped in rotting cloth tied with black string. The men in coats stepped forward for the first time, their hands twitching like they'd been waiting for this moment. Mr. Hampton whispered, "We shouldn't be doing this." But the men ignored him. They lifted the bundle out and began chanting under their breath in a language that made my skin crawl. I swear the air grew colder, the floodlight flickered, and for a moment, I felt as though the ground beneath us was shifting, like the earth itself was uneasy. I wanted to leave. I really did. But something held me there. Some morbid magnetism. One of the men cut the string around the bundle. The cloth fell away. It wasn't bones. It wasn't relics. It was hair. Thick, matted strands of black hair, tangled with bits of fingernail and teeth. The smell that burst out was rancid, like burned flesh. Suddenly, the ground around us trembled. I thought it was an earthquake at first, but then I noticed the graves. The soil on nearby plots was shifting, rising, as if something underneath was trying to claw its way out. "Close it back up," Hampton shouted, panicked. "For God's sake, close it." But it was too late. From the hole we dug, a hand shot up. Thin, pale, and covered in soil, the fingers twisted unnaturally, bending backward as they clawed for the air. I stumbled back, screaming. The men in coats didn't move, though. They were smiling. The hand was followed by another, then the crown of a head wet with dirt, hair hanging in clumps, and finally, a face. Not a skull, not decomposed, but a face that looked almost fresh, young, beautiful, but with eyes that were completely black. Eleanor Price. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. The men dropped to their knees, bowing, whispering in that awful language. Hampton grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the gates. "Run, now!" I didn't argue. We sprinted, not looking back, as the humming grew louder, echoing across the cemetery. When we reached the road, I turned for just a second. Under the flickering floodlight, I saw Eleanor standing beside the grave, her black eyes fixed on me. The men were gone. Only she remained, smiling faintly, her head tilted like she was memorizing my face. I quit the funeral home the next morning. Hampton never answered my calls again. A week later, I read his obituary in the local paper. Heart attack, they said. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night. Sometimes, when I'm driving past Cedar Hill, I see her, standing at the edge of the cemetery in that tattered white dress, hair hanging over her shoulders, eyes as black as the night sky. She always watches me, and I know one day she's going to step off that grass and follow me home. When I was 19, I worked at a gas station in a tiny town outside of Pittsburgh. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me just enough money to scrape by. My shift was usually overnight, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant the station was dead quiet most of the time. The weird part wasn't the gas station itself, it was what stood across the road. Directly opposite the gas station, behind a row of leaning iron fences and a crumbling brick wall, was Greenwood Cemetery. It stretched out for acres, and from the front counter I could see rows of crooked gravestones fading into the mist. Nobody visited at night, of course, except, sometimes I swear, I saw figures moving among the stones, shadows pacing slowly like they were waiting for something. At first I told myself I was imagining it. Long hours, caffeine overload, boredom, it all messes with your head. But one night around 2 a.m. I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A man standing perfectly still inside the cemetery, right across from the glass storefront. He wasn't moving, wasn't visiting a grave, just standing, facing the gas station. His outline was pale in the fog, his head tilted slightly to the side like he was studying me. I froze behind the counter. The store was empty. It felt like he could see me through the glass, though I knew it was impossible from that distance. After a few minutes, I turned to check the security monitor, and when I looked back, he was gone. That was the start of it. For the next week, I kept seeing the man in the cemetery, sometimes closer to the fence, sometimes farther away, but always watching. He never moved, never spoke, never even blinked. My coworker Nate thought I was losing it. "Dude, you need more sleep," he laughed. But I could tell, deep down, he didn't want to look out the window himself. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was late October, the kind of cold that stings your lungs. The wind rattled the station's doors, and I was huddled by the heater with a cup of stale coffee. That's when I noticed movement again, not just one figure this time, several. A group of them drifting slowly between the tombstones. Men, women, even what looked like a child. Their faces were pale, glowing faintly, their movements unnaturally slow, as though they weren't walking but gliding. My chest tightened. I couldn't look away. And then, all at once, they stopped. Every one of them turned toward me, their heads snapping in unison, like puppets on strings. My heart nearly stopped. Their mouths opened, but instead of sound, a wave of silence hit me. The night went still. No wind, no hum of the refrigerators, nothing. Just silence pressing against my skull until my ears rang. That's when the phone behind the counter rang. I jumped, nearly spilling my coffee. It was the landline we almost never used, reserved for emergencies. I picked it up with shaking hands. A voice whispered, "Why are you watching us?" I slammed the phone down, gasping for air. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wanted to run out the back door, drive anywhere else, but my legs felt like stone. When I finally glanced back at the cemetery, the figures were gone. I didn't tell Nate about the call. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? But things got worse. Every shift, the silence came back. Not all at once, but creeping, like the world itself was being turned down. The figures appeared more often, standing at the fence now, close enough that I could see their hollow eyes, their gray skin stretched too thin. They were waiting, watching. One night, when the silence hit, the lights in the gas station flickered. I grabbed the flashlight under the counter, panic rising in my chest. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps. Inside the store. Slow, deliberate, heavy. "Hello?" I croaked, shining the flashlight down the aisles. Nothing. But the footsteps grew louder, closer, circling me like something unseen was stalking just beyond the beam. Then, the phone rang again. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to answer. The same voice whispered, "Turn around." Against everything screaming inside me, I turned. And I saw him, the man who had first appeared across the street. He was inside the gas station now, standing by the glass door, his pale face grinning. His eyes were pits of black, his teeth too many for his mouth. He pressed his hand against the glass, and frost spread across it instantly. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and when I blinked, he was gone. Just gone. I quit the gas station the next morning. I didn't even bother collecting my last paycheck. I packed a bag and moved 3 towns over, thinking distance would help. For a while, it did, until last year. I was driving home late from a friend's place, half asleep on the highway, when I stopped at a random gas station for coffee. I didn't think much of it at first. The place looked the same as any other, fluorescent lights, buzzing refrigerators. But when I walked to the counter, I froze. Through the glass windows across the empty lot, I saw it. A cemetery. And standing among the graves was the same man, pale and grinning, his head tilted just so. He lifted his hand slowly, pointing directly at me. And I swear to God, the phone behind the counter started ringing. I've debated for years whether to tell this story, not because I'm afraid people will call me crazy. I stopped caring about that long ago, but because I worry that by telling it, I'll somehow make it stronger. Like speaking its name will invite it back into my life. But I can't keep it bottled anymore. Maybe writing it down will lift the weight. When I was a kid, my grandparents lived in a small Pennsylvania town. They owned an old house that backed right up against a graveyard. Literally, Their backyard ended at a rusted chain-link fence, and just beyond it stretched rows of crooked stones, some dating back to the 1700s. As a child, I was terrified of that cemetery. The fog, the way the trees seemed to reach over the graves, the eerie silence at night. It all seemed wrong. But my grandfather always said, "The dead can't hurt you. It's the living you need to fear." I believed him, until the night I learned otherwise. It was the summer of 2004 when I was 12. My parents had dropped me off for a weekend while they went on a trip. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The air was too still, and the cicadas that usually screamed outside were oddly quiet. Around midnight, I got up to get water and glanced out the back window. That's when I saw him. A man standing in the graveyard, only a few feet from the fence. He was tall, dressed in black, with a pale face that seemed to glow in the moonlight. He wasn't moving. He was just watching the house. I ducked under the window, heart slamming in my chest. After what felt like forever, I peeked again. He was gone. The next morning, I told my grandparents. My grandfather frowned but said nothing. My grandmother, though, looked pale. She whispered something to him in German, something I didn't understand. That day, they didn't let me go outside. That night, I saw him again. Same spot, same stillness, same head tilted slightly as if memorizing the shape of the house. This time, I ran to my grandfather's room and begged him to look. He sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and took me outside. But when we reached the fence, the man was gone. "See?" my grandfather said, his voice stern. "Nothing but your imagination?" But I knew he was lying. His hand was shaking as he held the flashlight. The third night was the worst. I woke up to tapping, slow, deliberate tapping against the bedroom window. My stomach dropped. I was on the second floor. No tree branches reached that high. I forced myself to look. And there he was. The same man, his pale face pressed against the glass, his lips curved into a grin. His eyes were pure black, endless. He lifted his hand and tapped again, his fingernails screeching against the pane. I screamed. By the time my grandparents rushed in, the window was empty. My grandfather looked furious, but not at me, at something else, something he refused to explain. That night, he made me sleep in their room, and he sat awake in a chair until dawn, clutching something in his pocket. Years passed, and I tried to bury that memory, but I never stayed overnight at their house again. When I was 23, my grandfather died. I went back for the funeral. It was held in the same graveyard behind their house. As we lowered the coffin into the earth, I felt that same icy dread crawling up my spine. And when I glanced across the rows of stones, my blood froze. He was there. The same man, unchanged, watching from a distance, pale face, black eyes, tilted head, like he hadn't aged a day. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Nobody else seemed to notice. After the service, I asked my grandmother about him. She grew pale, shook her head, and whispered, "Don't look at him. Don't acknowledge him. Promise me." I pressed her, desperate. Finally, she broke down. She told me our family carried a curse, that long ago one of our ancestors, her great-grandfather, had stolen something sacred from a grave, some kind of burial charm meant to keep a restless soul bound. Ever since, a watcher had followed the family, always appearing near graveyards, always staring, waiting for the right moment. "Don't speak to him," she said. "If you do, he'll know you see him, and then he'll follow you everywhere." I wish I had listened. A year later, drunk and reckless, I visited that cemetery alone at night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove it was all superstition. Maybe I wanted answers. Whatever the reason, I stood among the stones, calling out into the fog. And he appeared, closer this time, only a few feet away. His smile stretched wider, too many teeth for a human mouth. My legs shook, but I forced the words out. "What do you want?" For the first time, he spoke. His voice was like wind through dry leaves, low and rasping. "Your grave." The world tilted, my vision blurred, and then he was gone. Since that night, he's never left me. No matter where I move, no matter how far I go, I see him. Sometimes outside my apartment window, sometimes across the street, sometimes reflected in mirrors, always watching, always waiting. And here's the part that makes me wonder if writing this is a mistake. Last night, I woke to a sound in my apartment, a slow, deliberate tapping at the bedroom window. My heart froze. I knew it was him. When I gathered the courage to look, the glass was empty. But this morning, when I checked my phone, there was a new photo in my gallery. One I didn't take. It was of me, asleep in my bed, and in the corner of the photo, standing by the window, was the watcher, smiling,